By the time the first motorcycle went down in the ditch, the mountain was already on fire. Not somewhere far off, not a faint orange line on the horizon. It was here, in the trees, in the grass, in the wind itself. Smoke rolled across the road so thick the riders could barely see each other. Sparks came flying through the dark like handfuls of burning nails. One second there were engines roaring and men shouting. The next a pine exploded beside the road and dropped half its crown in a sheet of flame. And right in the middle of that road, where no sane person should have been standing, was an old woman with a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. She didn't wave. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She just screamed over the fire. "Kill the engines if you want to live." 57 Hells Angels had been trying to outrun the wildfire for the last 20 minutes. Now they were trapped between two burning ridges. Their main route was blocked by falling timber. Their fallback road was already swallowed by flame, and the only person standing between them and a firestorm looked about 80 years old and weighed less than half the men staring at her. The first instinct in a group like that was never obedience. It was suspicion. A big rider with a gray beard and a soot-blackened bandana leaned his bike sideways and yelled, "Lady, get off the damn road!" She raised the shotgun, not at him, at the line of trees behind him. 3 seconds. That crown goes up, this whole stretch becomes an oven. You can argue with me, or you can die stupid. Then the trees behind him ignited. Not slowly, not dramatically. Instantly. The top of the ridge flashed orange. A deep rushing sound rolled through the timber. The heat hit the men on the road like the inside of an open furnace. Several bikes rocked. Somebody cursed. Somebody else shouted that the west side was gone too. The old woman stepped closer into their headlights. Her white hair was tied back in a knot. Her face was all hard lines and ash. She wore men's work boots, an old denim jacket, and the kind of expression that made it clear she had stopped being impressed by danger a very long time ago. "Engines off," she said again. "Now, you keep revving in this smoke, half of you pass out before you make the turn." That was the part that got them. Not the shotgun, not the nerve. The fact that she sounded like she knew exactly what the fire was about to do. One by one, then all at once, the engines died. The sudden silence was worse. Without the bikes, they could hear the mountain burning, trees cracking, sap popping, wind pushing flame through dry brush with a low, hungry roar. Somewhere lower in the valley, something metal blew apart with a boom that rolled up the slope like thunder. The old woman turned and pointed her lantern toward a break in the ditch, barely visible through the smoke. "Off the road, single file, no lights, stay close. Nobody rides. You push those bikes and you do exactly what I say." The same gray-bearded rider stared at her. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't even look back. "Martha Bell, and unless one of you boys knows this land better than I do, you'd better start moving." They followed, not because they trusted her, not yet, but because fire had a way of stripping men down to the truth. And the truth was simple now. The road was death. They dragged the bikes off the asphalt and onto a narrow service track that no map would have shown. It cut behind a wall of scrub oak and dropped into a shallow depression between black rock and dry grass. More than once the riders nearly lost footing on loose dirt. Their boots slipped. Handlebars slammed against branches. A younger rider coughed so hard he dropped to one knee and had to be hauled up by two others. Martha didn't slow down. "Wrap your sleeves over your nose. Not your mouth only. Your nose. Breathe shallow. Save your lungs." A tattooed rider in his 30s glared through streaming eyes. "You a firefighter or something?" "No," Martha said. "I'm the woman who stayed when the rest of this county forgot how this mountain burns." The line kept moving. The smoke thickened, then thinned, then shifted hard to the left as the wind changed. Somewhere above them, the fire ran uphill with terrifying speed. The men couldn't see it clearly anymore, but they could feel it. Heat pulsed through the dark in waves. Ash stuck to sweat, sparks landed on leather and denim, and had to be slapped out in motion. One of the bikes snagged on a root and tipped over. 3 men moved to pull it up. But a cry went up farther back. Rico had gone down. He was young, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a club patch darkened by soot. He dropped beside the path, one hand clawing at his throat, the other planted in the dirt as he tried and failed to drag in air. "Smoke inhalation," Martha said, already kneeling. "Get his vest open." The gray-bearded rider crouched beside her. He's done. She shot him a look so cold it cut through the heat. He's not done until I say he's done. She shoved her lantern into another man's hands, forced Rico's chin up, slapped his cheeks twice, then pointed at the biggest of the riders. You, big shoulders, carry him when he can't walk. You lose him, you answer to me. The rider blinked stunned at being ordered around on a burning mountain by a stranger twice his age. Then without a word, he lifted Rico under the arms. They kept moving. The track narrowed again, passing through a stand of dead manzanita so dry it sounded like bones snapping when the bike scraped against it. Martha moved faster now, glancing into the dark, reading the wind the way some people read faces. Then she stopped so suddenly the line nearly ran into itself. Everybody froze. The old woman lifted one hand. At first they heard nothing except fire. Then the crack of branches. Then a deeper splintering groan from above. Down, Martha said. No one obeyed quickly enough. She spun and screamed, down now. The whole line threw itself flat a split second before a flaming limb the size of a telephone pole smashed across the track behind them. It showered sparks and cinders over the men and bikes. The blast of heat was so fierce it felt like skin peeling. Someone shouted in pain. A saddlebag caught fire. Another rider slapped it out with both hands. Rico, half conscious, made a strangled sound from somewhere in the dirt. Martha was already up again. That was your warning. Next one kills you. Move. A rider with a skull ring spat ash and muttered, Jesus Christ. No, Martha said, marching ahead. Jesus isn't walking you off this ridge. I am. Under any other circumstances, that line would have gotten her laughed at. Maybe worse. Tonight nobody laughed. The path finally opened into what had once been a cattle cut. A low, winding strip of bare earth between scrub and rock. The men could breathe a little easier there, though easier meant only that each lungful felt less like swallowing sandpaper. Their boots hit hard ground. Their bikes rolled faster. The air shifted again. And for the first time they heard something that didn't belong to the fire. Water. Not much. A tank, maybe a pump line. Something man-made. The men looked up. Ahead through smoke and intermittent flame glow stood the shadow of a house. Small, old, wood-sided, weather-beaten, a porch roof slanting low over two rocking chairs. One upstairs window boarded, a rusted windmill behind it. To the left, what looked like a root cellar built into the earth. Farther uphill, barely visible, a corrugated storm shelter tucked against black stone. The entire property sat in a natural bowl of cleared land, like the mountain had spared this one patch just long enough for prayer. Martha didn't pause to admire it. Get them in. Men who had spent years being the most feared thing on most roads suddenly found themselves staring at that house like survivors spotting shore after shipwreck. But even then, instinct fought common sense. There were too many of them. The place was too small. An old wood in a wildfire felt more like a coffin than shelter. The gray-bearded rider grabbed Martha's arm. You expect 57 men to fit in that? No, she said. I expect 57 men to do what they're told before this fire decides for them. She jerked free and started issuing orders with military precision. Any man with burns or bad lungs goes to the cellar first. Strongest 10 unload every water container you see. You smell gasoline, strip the jacket. You see a spark, stop it. No smoking, no arguing, no wandering off. If you brought pride with you, leave it outside. One of the riders stepped forward, tall, broad, carrying himself like people usually moved when he entered a room. His patch marked him as someone important. Maybe the chapter president, maybe more. We're not cramming into holes in the ground because a grandma says so. Martha turned to him fully for the first time. The fire behind them lit half her face orange. I buried a husband on this land. I watched a summer wind turn a canyon into a furnace before you were old enough to shave. I dug that cellar deeper after the county said I was crazy. I laid in water lines they told me I'd never need. And I can tell by the way the smoke is folding over that ridge that in less than 10 minutes this whole yard will be under ember rain. She stepped closer. So you can call me Grandma's son or ma'am. Makes no difference to me. But if you waste another breath challenging me, I will let the fire teach you manners. For a second, nobody moved. Then the big man looked away first. Do it, he growled to his brothers. And just like that, the yard erupted into motion. Men stumbled and ran. Saddlebags were ripped open. Bottled water med kits, blankets, tools, and half-melted packs were thrown onto the porch. Two riders dragged Rico toward the cellar. Another man nearly fell trying to unlatch a warped storm hatch until Martha shoved him aside and yanked it open, herself with a strength that didn't make sense. The inside smelled of dirt, iron, and old wood. Down the steps, no bunching, keep air moving. A rider in fingerless gloves peered into the darkness. "How the hell were you ready for this?" Martha gave a short, humorless shrug. "I wasn't ready. I was realistic." Then the first ember storm hit. It came with a roar of wind so sudden it made every man in the yard look up. The sky above the property went from smoky black to a whirling red madness of ash and sparks. Burning needles rained across the roof. The porch began to hiss and spit. Somewhere behind the barn, a pile of old timber caught and flared. "Move!" Martha shouted. The men surged, some into the root cellar, some toward the storm shelter, some to the porch hauling supplies. A few stayed in the yard trying to keep the bikes upright and out of the way, though it was already obvious most of the machines would never leave this mountain the same way they came. Rico was halfway down the cellar steps when he started choking again. Harder this time. Body bucking. "Get him up! Get him up!" a rider yelled. Martha dropped beside him, thrust a canteen into another man's chest, and slapped Rico once across the face, hard enough to focus him. "Listen to my voice. Small breaths through cloth. Slow. Don't fight your lungs." He looked at her terrified. "I can't." "Yes, you can." "I can't." Shh. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him eye to eye. "You do not get to die in my cellar." The words landed like a command pulled out of another era. Rico nodded barely. Two men got him down the steps. Up above, the windmill shrieked as sparks blew through its veins. The old house creaked. Smoke pushed across the porch in waves. A younger rider came around the side shouting that there was another structure out back, some kind of feed shed, already burning. Martha's face changed then, not to fear, to calculation. How many in the cellar? 21. Shelter? Maybe 15. House 10 of mine and counting. She turned in place doing the math, measuring space against bodies, oxygen against panic. The chapter leader stepped beside her again, this time without attitude. "What do you need?" For the first time, she answered him like an equal. "I need your men alive, disciplined and quiet when I tell them to be. I need your strongest outside for 2 minutes only. I need every water bucket filled. And I need to know exactly how much fuel is still sitting on this property before the shed goes up and takes the yard with it." He looked at her, then toward the ridgeline where the mountain was now fully burning. A long wall of moving orange behind the black trees. "What if this place won't hold?" Martha stared into the fire like she had asked that question years ago and hated the answer every time. "Then we make it hold." A sound came from uphill. Not wind, not timber. A motorcycle engine. Every head snapped toward the dark. Another rider. Somehow someone was still out there on the mountain, coming in blind through smoke and fire. Engine screaming too fast, too close, and headed straight for the burning fence line beside Martha Bell's house. Martha grabbed the lantern and ran toward the yard. Everybody followed her. The motorcycle came out of the smoke like a bullet fired by the mountain. Its headlight was dead. One saddlebag was on fire, and the rider was leaning so hard to one side it looked less like control and more like a man refusing to fall until his body gave him no choice. He burst through the broken fence, clipped a post, and skidded across Martha Bell's yard in a shower of dirt sparks and burning pine needles before the bike slammed sideways and rolled. 3 men ran for him. "Don't touch the fuel!" Martha shouted. Too late. Gasoline was already pouring in a dark ribbon from the torn tank, crawling through the dust toward a strip of ember-covered grass beside the porch. The fallen rider tried to rise and collapsed again. His bandana was half burned up the back. One glove was missing. His right forearm was raw and red where the skin had cooked under the heat. He looked up through ash-caked lashes and coughed out one broken sentence. "Road's gone." Then the fuel lit. Fire ripped along the spilled gas with a fast, ugly hiss. It reached the bike and turned the whole machine into a violent orange bloom. Men threw themselves backward. One hit the porch post. Another tripped on a crate of bottled water and went down hard. Heat punched across the yard. Martha did not move back. Shovel. Dirt, not water, dirt. The chapter president moved first this time. You heard her. Shovels. Smother it. Two riders tore around the side of the house and came back with flat grain shovels hanging from nails by the shed. Others dropped to their knees and clawed loose earth by hand. Dirt flew. Sparks snapped. Smoke pushed low and thick over the yard, turning every lantern beam into a pale, dirty tunnel. Get him clear, Martha snapped, pointing at the burn rider. The gray-bearded man and another angel dragged him toward the porch by the shoulders. The rider screamed once when his leg hit a rock, then bit it back like he was ashamed of the sound. How many were behind you? The chapter president demanded. The man stared up at him disoriented. None, we split at the switchback. I thought you were all dead. Martha cut in. Save it. Can he walk? No. Then he goes in the cellar, burns first. Questions later. She spun toward the bike fire. The front tire blew with a gunshot crack. Several men flinched. One cursed. Another started toward a water bucket. Martha shoved his arm down with surprising force. Did you not hear me? Water spreads fuel. Dirt. The rider glared, stung by being corrected in front of his brothers. But before he could say anything, the chapter president barked over him. Do what she says. That changed the yard more than the words themselves. Authority had shifted. Not formally, not in any way the men would have admitted out loud. But every second the fire closed in, the proof got harder to fight. Martha saw danger sooner. Martha wasted no motion. Martha was not improvising. She was executing something that had lived in her bones for years. Within a minute, the bike fire was buried under mounds of dirt, smoking and snapping, but no longer spreading. The burning grass was stomped out. The rider who had come in alone was hauled to the porch where Martha knelt and cut the sleeve off his arm with a knife from her boot. A younger biker watched her work. You carry that thing all the time. I carry what I need. She studied the burn, then shouted without looking up. Boil water if there's still pressure in the line. Clean cloth, no greasy rags. And somebody bring me the old green tin from the kitchen shelf. A man nearest the door blinked. The what? The old green tin, top shelf left side next to the flour canister. If you come back with the wrong thing, I'll know. He ran. The burned rider was barely conscious now. His beard was singed to patches. Martha poured a measured trickle of water over his wrist and forearm, then checked his neck and eyes, breathing. Fast, precise, no drama. The chapter president crouched beside her. Up close, he looked even rougher than before. Late 50s maybe, thick through the chest, one eye bloodshot from smoke. Road scars under soot. He held himself like a man used to getting answers. You got a name for me, son? Martha asked the injured rider. He swallowed. Deke. Deke, you hear me? A weak nod. You stay awake, you pass out on me. I make your friends sing church hymns until you wake up out of pure spite. One of the men actually gave a short laugh before catching himself. Deke looked confused, then coughed, then managed the faintest twitch of a smile. Good, Martha said. You're still in there? The man returned from the kitchen with the green tin. Martha popped it open. Salve, gauze. Old but carefully kept. Nothing on this property was random. Not the cellar, not the storm shelter, not even this. Outside, the ember rain thickened. Ash collected in the corners of the porch. The sky had turned the color of a forged door. The chapter president glanced toward the ridge and said quietly, We need to know what this place can take. Martha kept wrapping Deke's arm. Then listen closely. The house is old, but the crawl space is stone. The cellar's deep and cool, but it won't hold all of you if the air turns. The storm shelter's stronger, but tighter. There's a livestock bunker uphill, stone face built half into the ground. I use it for winter feed and storm storage. That's the safest structure here. Then why aren't we all there now? Because the open ground between here and there will roast you alive if the wind shifts before we move. That shut him up for 2 seconds. Then how long do we have? Martha looked not at the flames, but at the smoke folding over the black pines beyond the windmill, at the direction of the ash, at the color of the air near the ground. 8 minutes before the ember load gets worse. 15 before the first real run hits this yard. Maybe less if something heavy torches on the east slope. The chapter president studied her face. You guessing? She tied off the bandage and rose. No, guessing sounds hopeful. She turned to the yard and raised her voice. Everybody listened. Conversation stopped. Boots shifted. Metal clinked. Men on the porch in the yard, on the cellar steps, and near the storm hatch all looked toward her. If you can still smell gasoline on your clothes, strip the outer layer now. Leather catches and holds heat. Wet cloth on your mouth and nose. Not dry, wet. Any lighters, matches, or spare fuel containers go in that metal trough by the pump. Not in your pockets. Not near the house. We are sorting by injuries and by discipline. If you panic, you make somebody else die. If you start shouting, I put you to work until your lungs remember what for. No one objected. She pointed. You 4 inventory water. You 3 clear the porch and open every path to the cellar. You 2 get that hose line out even if pressure fails. You 6 with me around the structures. I want every ember trap identified. A wiry rider with prison yard tattoos across both knuckles frowned. Ember trap. Places fire likes to hide, Martha said, already moving. Under steps in gutters, dry leaves against walls, vents, corners, where men tell themselves they'll check later and then don't. The wiry rider muttered. Hell. Yes, Martha said, and it's early yet. They moved fast around the property. Behind the house, the little feed shed was already burning through one wall. Not roaring yet, but chewing inward with steady purpose. The old pump handle by the water tank still worked, though the pressure was weak and coughing. A stack of split fence posts near the barn had begun to smoke at the ends. The windmill base was catching embers in its rusted braces. Every structure looked one bad gust away from becoming a torch. Martha pointed with economy. Tear that stack apart, drag it into bare dirt, hose the tank supports. Not the fire, the supports. If the tank drops, we lose water. And then we lose everybody. One rider hesitated near the burning shed. It's too far gone. Martha rounded on him. That shed lights the barn lights the side yard lights the porch lights the house lights the trees, and then your shelters become ovens. Nothing out here is separate. The rider gritted his teeth and moved. From the root cellar came the sound of coughing and men shifting shoulder to shoulder in too little space. The chapter president descended 3 steps, checked the occupants, came back up with soot striped over his face. 24 in there now. 2 bad lungs, 1 bad ankle. Deke makes 25 if we put him down. No, Martha said. Deke stays in the house for the moment. He can't take cellar air yet. What about the others? They stay until I tell them to move. A thick-necked rider in his 40s stepped off the porch. You keep saying that like it's simple. It ain't. We got 57 men, maybe more if anyone else crawls in. Too many bodies, not enough air, not enough room. Martha looked at him. Now you're thinking. Good. Keep going. He pointed toward the dark beyond the cleared yard. What if this fire circles us? It will. A beat. And what if it crowns? It probably will. He stared. Then what exactly is your plan? An old lady, Martha's eyes hardened. Not because of the words, but because the mountain behind him suddenly made a deep booming sound that she did not like. My plan is layers. Nobody answered. She pointed as she spoke. Cellar for heat shelter and the worst of the lungs. Storm bunker for overflow and strongest bodies because they can handle tight space. House for short rotation, only never permanent. Yard crews in shifts to kill spot fires before they grow teeth. Water rationed by breath, not thirst. We do not make one shelter the whole bet. One failure doesn't get to kill everyone. The chapter president gave a slow nod. That's a real plan. Martha stared past him toward the trees. It used to be. That line stuck somewhere in the men nearest her, but there was no time to ask what she meant. The boom came again, then another. Not explosions, tree trunks. Back, Martha shouted. Off the east line. The warning came just as 3 torching pines beyond the fence began to lean. For one stretched second, they looked frozen in the firelight, trunks burning from the inside, crowns flinging sparks into the sky. Then they came down. The crash hit the property like a bomb. Fence posts shattered. Flames blew outward. Men ducked behind the stock tank and porch supports. A wave of embers rolled across the yard and peppered the roof, the windowsills, the old rocking chairs, the stacked crates, the wet rags. Everything. "Roof," someone yelled. Martha was already running for the ladder on the side of the house. The chapter president caught her by the elbow. "No, if that roof catches, we lose the center. I'll send men." "You'll send the wrong men." She tore free, shouldered the ladder up in one practice movement that looked impossible at her age, and slammed it against the porch edge below the roofline. Two riders lunged to steady it as she climbed. The yard fell into a strange silence for half a second. Then men who had spent most of their lives taking orders from no one started moving exactly when and where she needed them. Buckets here, wet blankets, check the eaves, cellar doors shut till the smoke clears. Martha reached the roof, crouched low against the hail of embers, and began beating out spot fires with a soaked canvas tarp. One here, one near the chimney, another under the gutter line. She moved with ruthless efficiency, not wasting a strike. Below, the chapter president started directing men with the same hard edge she used. "You heard her? Watch the eaves, don't bunch up. You left side. You keep that ladder steady." A rider near the pump suddenly shouted, "No pressure, we're losing the line." Martha looked down sharply. Water was now coming in weak sputters, not flow. "Use the reserve drums." A man stared. "What reserve drums?" "Buried under the lean-to behind the chicken wire enclosure." There was a collective pause. The chapter president tilted his head. "You buried water drums." Martha stamped out another ember and shouted back, "I buried everything this county called paranoid." They found the drums exactly where she said they would be. 2, then 4, then 6 heavy sealed containers under a false dirt cover and old scrap planks. The riders hauled them out one by one, grunting with effort, astonishment visible even through ash. The gray-bearded rider looked up at her on the roof and called almost respectfully now, "How many surprises you got on this property?" Martha killed another ember by the chimney and answered without looking down. "Depends how serious the fire gets." A crash came from inside the house. Everyone spun. For one terrible second, Martha thought the floor had gone or the stove had tipped. Then a young biker burst out the front door, hauling another man by the collar. He went down, couldn't breathe. The fallen man was pale under soot, eyes wide, chest jerking uselessly. "Porch floor," Martha shouted, as she came down the ladder fast enough to scare the men holding it. "Sit him up. Don't lay him flat. Wet cloth, small breaths, no crowding around him." The house was no longer safe as an intake point. Too much smoke was leaking through the old frame. Martha hit the porch and changed the whole arrangement in seconds. New layout, house only for supplies and treatment. Nobody camps in there. Cellar takes 12 more max. Storm shelter takes all overflow. Who can tolerate heat? Strong bodies rotate outside on spark watch. I want counts every 3 minutes. No freelancing. The chapter president repeated it louder for the yard. This time there was no pushback at all. Men carried supplies. Men carried injured brothers. Men who looked terrifying in daylight now moved carefully through door frames and cellar steps because an old woman had told them carelessness was another name for murder. The sky lowered. The air grew heavier. The sound of the wildfire changed pitch, deepening into that monstrous roar that meant the fire front was no longer on the ridge. It was descending. Several riders heard it at once. One whispered, "Oh no." Another crossed himself. Martha turned slowly toward the dark beyond the yard. The glow between the trees was no longer scattered. It was solid. A wall, not metaphorically, not from fear. A literal advancing wall of orange-red light moving behind the black trunks, eating brush, consuming deadfall, rising, dropping, breathing as the wind drove it downhill toward the bowl where her house stood. The chapter president came up beside her, and for the first time his voice had no steel in it at all. "How long now?" Martha watched the fire the way a sailor watches a wave he knows he cannot stop. "Less than 5. Then she looked at the men, at the cellar entrance, at the storm shelter hatch, at the buried drums, at the weak roof, at the choking smoke, at the stripped jackets and soot-black hands and stunned faces waiting on her next sentence. And what she said next made every one of them understand that the night was about to become much worse than simple survival. No more half measures. From this moment on, anybody outside when I tell them down is already dead. She stepped off the porch, raised her lantern, and pointed through the smoke toward the upper slope. Because they're barely visible through flame and drifting ash stood the dark stone shape of the livestock bunker. And between them and it, the whole yard began to rain fire. The first wave of ember rain came down so thick it made the yard look like it was under attack from the sky. Not drifting ash, not stray sparks, sheets of them, red-orange flecks spinning in the wind, bouncing off the porch, sliding across the packed dirt lodging under the eaves, catching in jacket seams, dropping into open collars, skittering across helmets, bedding down in every crack and corner where fire could wait 10 quiet seconds and then become catastrophe. Martha didn't waste one of those seconds. Cellar line now, not all at once. Storm shelter next. The rest hold by the porch until I place you. The chapter president was already repeating her orders before the last word left her mouth. Move single file. Nobody bunches the steps. Men who looked like they would rather fight a bar full of armed strangers than take direction from anyone were now shoving each other into formation because the alternative was visible and advancing. Behind the black skeletons of the trees, the main body of the wildfire was rolling downhill in a slow, impossible wall. Sometimes hidden by smoke, sometimes visible in full as whole brush lines torched and vanished. Rico had to be half carried toward the root cellar. Deke, his arm bandaged, but his face still gray with shock, was dragged by two brothers into the house, long enough to keep him out of the open. One rider with singed eyebrows kept slapping at the back of his vest where tiny embers were smoldering. Another stood frozen for a second too long, staring at the tree line like his brain refused to accept what his eyes were telling him. Martha caught him by the front of the shirt and shoved him toward the storm shelter. You want to admire it? Do it from underground. He stumbled, snapped back to himself, and went. The air pressure changed. That was the part none of them were ready for. Before the fire front fully arrived, the mountains seemed to inhale. Wind pulled sideways across the yard, sharp and hot. Smoke stopped drifting one way and began spinning in confused circles. The old windmill gave a shriek like metal in pain. Somewhere inside the house, a window rattled so hard it sounded close to breaking. The chapter president looked uphill toward the livestock bunker, then at the open ground between. No chance. Not in this gust, Martha said. You'd be carrying bodies before you made the fence. He wiped ash from his beard with the back of his wrist. Then we're stuck in split cover. We're alive in split cover. That's not the same thing. A rider stumbled out of the cellar, coughing hard. Martha was on him instantly. What are you doing out? Can't breathe down there. You think you'll breathe better out here. He bent double, sucking short, panicked breaths. He was younger than most, maybe early 30s, heavy shoulders, smoke streaks running through the grime on his face where his eyes had watered. Fear had stripped him down to something almost childlike. I can't get air. I can't. Martha grabbed a wet rag from a bucket, shoved it over his nose and mouth, and forced him to look at her. You are not drowning. Your body thinks you are. Those are not the same thing. 4 counts in hold, 2 4 counts out. You listen to me, not to panic. He tried, failed, tried again. The chapter president came close. He ain't going to make cellar space. He doesn't need cellar space right now, Martha said. He needs control. She kept her hand behind the back of his neck until his breathing came down one notch from terror to misery. There. Again. He nodded weakly. A scream rose from the side yard. Every head turned. The burning feed shed had finally broken open. What had been a contained wall fire now blew out through the roof line in a rush of flame. Dry feed sacks, old boards, and years of dust turned the whole structure into a torch. Fire leaned toward the barn with the wind. The exposed side of the shed began spitting out chunks of burning material into the dark. Martha didn't curse. That would have wasted breath. You 6 with me. Everyone else stay on assignment. The chapter president moved with her. So did the gray-bearded rider, the prison-tattooed wiry man, 2 younger angels, and one broad-shouldered biker, whose left sleeve had been half burned off, but who looked too stubborn to admit pain. They rounded the house and the heat slammed them sideways. Up close, the shed looked less like a building and more like a living thing trying to climb out of itself. Rafters glowed. The doorway was a square of pure orange. The roof had started to sag in the middle. 20 feet away, the barn wall was already peppered with sparks, and the old dry grass along the foundation had begun to smoke in 3 separate places. Martha pointed in quick, violent jabs. "You beat out that grass. You two tear down that fence section before it catches and carries. Bucket line here, not at the doorway at the barn wall. We save what spreads, not what's lost." One rider shouted over the roar, "There's tools in there." Martha wheeled on him. "Then bury them tomorrow." The chapter president grabbed a flat shovel and went to work scraping burning grass back to dirt. 2 others kicked apart the fence line, ripping slats loose and hauling them into the open where they couldn't transmit flame. Another biker threw a wet blanket over a smoking patch at the barn corner and stamped it down with both boots. Then the shed roof groaned. Every man out there heard it. Deep, wooden, final. "Back!" Martha screamed. They leaped away as half the roof caved inward, sending a cyclone of sparks 30 feet into the air. A wave of heat punched across the yard so hard, one of the younger riders staggered backward and fell on his hands. The broad-shouldered biker with the burned sleeve turned his face aside a fraction too late and cried out. The side of his neck had just taken a spray of cinders. Martha spun, grabbed him by the jaw, checked the burn with one glance, then shoved him toward the porch. "Treatment line. Now." "I'm fine. You are blistering while you lie." He went. For a few terrible seconds, it looked like the shed collapse would send enough fire sideways to ignite the barn roof. Men on the bucket line threw what little water they could spare against the lower wall. The chapter president and Graybeard kept scraping and kicking burning grass back to bare soil. Martha climbed onto an overturned trough to reach the barn edge and beat out 3 separate ember nests with the soaked tarp. A rider near the corner yelled, "More sparks coming under." "Get lower," Martha shouted back. "Fire likes to crawl before it leaps." He dropped to a knee, peered beneath the wall edge, then started clawing out smoking straw and old leaves that had packed under the siding. Another 5 minutes and the whole barn would have lit from underneath. He looked up at Martha with something like disbelief. "How the hell do you see all this?" "I remember what got missed before." That line landed differently. The chapter president heard it too. His shovel paused for 1 second. "Before what?" Martha hit another ember nest. "Before the Granger fire." The name meant nothing to most of them. To one older rider, it meant enough. He looked over. "That was back in the 70s, wasn't it?" 78. "You were there?" "My husband died there." No one spoke after that, not because they suddenly understood her, but because the sentence came out stripped bare. No dramatic weight, no invitation to pity. Just a fact that had clearly lived inside her for decades and turned into every buried drum, every reinforced cellar wall, every habit of looking twice at eaves and grass lines and dry corners. The wind shifted again, blowing a curtain of smoke through the side yard. The prison-tattooed rider coughed and pointed. "Barn window." A spark had gone through the cracked pane and caught an old hanging cloth inside. Martha shoved past him, reached through, grabbed the smoldering fabric with a hooked metal rod from beside the door, and yanked it out into the dirt before it could climb. The chapter president stared at the rod in her hand. "You just keep tools for every nightmare." Martha threw the smoking cloth down and stamped it out. "No, I keep tools for patterns." Behind them from the porch, someone shouted, "Martha!" Not lady, not old woman, not grandma, Martha. That changed more than anyone said out loud. She turned and ran. On the porch, Deke was half sitting against the wall, eyes glassy with pain, jaw tight. Beside him on the floorboards lay another biker on his side, breathing in ragged, high little pulls like each one hurt to win. His face was streaked red under soot, and when Martha dropped beside him, she saw the problem immediately. Burns. Bad ones. Not fresh like Deke's arm. Deeper. Hotter. More widespread. The man's right side had taken the kind of heat that cooked through layers before the nerves fully understood it. He clutched at Martha's sleeve with trembling fingers. "Don't leave me outside." It was the first plea of that kind any of them had voiced. Not "help me," not "fix this," not "am I okay," just that simple naked terror. "Don't leave me outside." Martha put one hand flat on his chest to steady him. "What's your name?" Leon. You're not outside Leon. He swallowed, hard eyes darting toward the orange flashes beyond the yard. If you move people, don't leave me. I know how this goes. Bad ones get left. Martha leaned closer until he could focus on her face. Listen carefully. Nobody gets left on this property while I'm standing up. His mouth shook once. He gave the tiniest nod. Good. Now hold still and let me work. She cut away the burned fabric at his shoulder and side while the younger riders around her watched in silence. It was ugly under there. Angry red in places, waxy in others. Leon's breathing hitched every time cloth moved near his skin. Deke, gritting through his own pain, turned his head and muttered, "He was the one behind me on the ridge." Martha glanced up. "He pull you through?" Deke nodded. Martha looked back down at Leon. "Then he doesn't get left twice." She had them wet, clean cloth in measured amounts. Not enough to waste the reserve, just enough to cool and cover. Every action was rationed now. Water, air, space, movement, noise. Inside the cellar, tempers finally started to crack. It had been building. Too many men in close dark, too much smoke leaking under the door in thin bad ribbons, too many bodies generating heat, too much fear with nowhere to run. When the third man came up demanding more water, the second man behind him accused him of taking extra already. Someone else shoved back that they'd all die if they didn't drink. Another voice said they'd die faster if idiots kept crowding the steps. Then a heavy thud echoed up from below, followed by raw swearing. The chapter president rose at once. "That's mine." "No," Martha said, "that's ours." They descended together. The root cellar was packed shoulder to shoulder with men sitting on crates, steps, and dirt floor. Wet cloths tied over their faces, eyes reflecting dim lantern light. The air down there felt close enough to chew. Two riders were nose to nose near the back wall, one with a cut cheek, the other with both fists clenched. "He took my bottle. I took one swallow." "You're lying." "Shut up, both of you," the chapter president growled. They didn't. That was how scared they were. Martha stepped between them before either could throw a punch. "Look at me." Nobody moved. She took the bottle from the cut-cheeked rider's hand, held it up, where everyone could see the remaining water slosh at the bottom. "This is worth more than your pride, your patch, or your opinion for the next few hours." Silence spread in the cellar. She pointed around the room. "Everybody thinks thirst is the enemy because thirst is what you feel. But panic drinks more than mouths do. Panic makes bad breathing. Bad breathing wastes air. Air runs out faster than water in tight ground. So from now on, I ration both." One of the men against the far wall muttered, "We ain't kids." Martha swung toward his voice. "Then stop acting like men seeing hardship for the first time." That shut him up. She handed the bottle to the chapter president. "One capful per man when I say, not before. Anybody steals water from the injured, I put them out in the yard and let nature negotiate." The threat should have sounded absurd. In that cellar, it sounded perfectly reasonable. Then the younger biker with the breathing panic had appeared at the top step again, clutching the doorframe. "I can't go back in there. Please, I can't." The plea made several heads turn. Not mocking. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. Men who had done violence, seen prison-broken bones and buried brothers, wish they were looking at one of their own, discover the simple, humiliating terror of not being able to trust his next breath. Martha climbed 2 steps and met him halfway. "What's your name, Wade?" "Wade, hear me. You are not weak. You are overloaded. There is a difference." His eyes were wet and furious at the same time. "I don't care what word you use. I can't do it." "Yes, you can, not alone. With a job." He blinked. She kept her voice flat and solid. "You stay by the cellar door. You count men in and out. You tell me if anyone gets glassy, confused, or too quiet. Panic hates purpose. So I'm giving you one." He stared at her like she had pulled him back from a ledge he hadn't realized he was standing on. After a second, he nodded. "Good," Martha said. "Count." He swallowed and started counting as men shifted positions for airflow. It wasn't magic. He was still scared, still breathing too hard. But now fear had rails to run on. When Martha merged into the yard again, the fire front was closer than before. Not just visible, felt. The sound of it had thickened into a constant, rolling concussion that seemed to press on the chest. The house windows rattled in their frames. The storm shelter hatch was hot to the touch. Embers kept finding the same weak places: porch corners, gutter joints, the windmill braces, the stacked kindling by the back step that no one had fully cleared. The chapter president came up beside her carrying the ration bottle. "They're holding." "Barely. Barely is still holding." He looked at her profile in the red light. "How many people died in that fire?" Martha didn't answer right away. Outside the property, somewhere down in the ravine, a whole stand of timber torched at once. The flare lit the yard bright enough to cast hard shadows. 17. My husband made 18. The chapter president exhaled through his nose. "And you stayed here after that?" "I stayed because leaving doesn't teach the mountain a lesson." He almost smiled at the madness of it, then didn't. From the storm shelter, someone hammered 3 quick knocks from inside, a signal now already learned. Martha crossed the yard and opened the hatch a fraction. A voice from below called up, "Air's getting bad." She measured the heat, the smoke, the timing. "Rotate 2 out, not more. Wet cloths on the ones going in." As the men shifted positions, the house roof made a deep, ugly sound overhead. Not one creak, a groan. Every face in the yard lifted at once. The porch beams shivered. Ash slid from the shingles. Somewhere inside the attic space, something heavy shifted. The gray-bearded rider looked up and said the thing no one wanted to say first. "That roof's going to come through." Nobody spoke for 1 heartbeat. Then Martha turned, seized the lantern, and ran for the ladder again, just as the old house groaned a second time louder now, and the men below began to realize that if the roof failed over the porch and main room, half their entire survival plan was about to collapse with it. The ladder hit the porch rail so hard the whole house seemed to answer with another groan. Martha didn't wait for anyone to steady it this time. She was already halfway up when the chapter president grabbed the side rails and barked for 2 more men to lock it in. Ash blew across all of them in hot, gritty waves. The shingles above were glowing at scattered points where ember nests had worked their way under old curls of tar and wood. But the sound underneath the roof was worse than the fire. It was the sound of weight shifting where weight should not have been shifting. "Martha," the gray-bearded rider shouted, "get down if it's gone soft." She ignored him, hauled herself onto the roofline, and dropped low on one knee. Heat came up through the shingles. Smoke rolled over the ridge of the roof in thick black folds. For a second, she disappeared in it completely, then reappeared farther up, beating down a bright line of creeping fire with the soaked canvas. The chapter president shielded his eyes and yelled, "What is it?" "Attic vent took sparks, and something in there's rolling." A rider near the porch steps pointed. "Chimney side." Flame licked out from under the shingles near the old stone stack. Martha crawled toward it, slammed the tarp down twice, then ripped a loose shingle free with both hands and flung it off the side. Underneath, dry nesting packed near the vent hole had already started to glow. Damn birds. She reached down barehanded for half a second, thought better of it, grabbed the hooked metal rod from where she'd tucked it into her belt, and dragged the burning nest material free. It came out in clumps red at the center. The chapter president and 2 others stomped it dead the second it hit the dirt. Then the roof groaned again, lower and deeper. Not the top this time. Inside. Martha froze, listening through the roar of the fire. "Everybody off the main room." Men on the porch moved fast, yanking supplies away from the doorway, dragging Deke farther down the boards, shifting Leon and 2 others clear of the ceiling span over the front half of the house. A heartbeat later, something crashed inside with a violent burst of sparks and dust. The front window blew outward. One rider ducked too late and took glass across the cheek. "What was that?" someone yelled. Martha flattened herself and shouted down. "Attic chest or beam? Doesn't matter. Front room's dead. Nobody under that ceiling again." The chapter president looked up at her. "Can the house still hold for storage, not shelter?" "Then we're tighter than before." "We were tight before. Now you know it." She kept working along the roofline until every visible ember trail was dead or too small to grow. When she finally came back down, her hair and jacket were full of sparks and soot, and the left sleeve of her denim coat had started to smolder near the cuff. The gray-bearded rider slapped it out without asking. She gave him one short nod. No one called her grandma now. No one called her old lady. No one looked at her like a curiosity. The chapter president met her at the bottom of the ladder. We're losing house volume. Pump pressure's nearly gone. Cellars cooking men slow. Shelters choking them faster. Tell me the next move. Martha turned toward the upper slope. Through gaps in the smoke, the livestock bunker sat in dark silhouette beyond a rise of bare ground and scrub. Between the porch and that bunker, the yard itself was still survivable in short bursts. But beyond the old fence line, the wind was driving spot fires through the grass in sudden flashes. Too much heat, too much exposure. No good line yet. Not the bunker, not until the gust breaks. Then what? She scanned left toward a black cut in the hillside where old runoff had eaten a shallow channel through dirt and stone. The trench route. It was narrow, ugly, half hidden. And if you didn't know exactly where it ran, it looked like nothing. Martha pointed. Reserve water, more of it. The chapter president followed her finger. Where upper trench beyond the chicken wire run, past the old lime pit, buried drums. Several men close enough to hear turned toward her all at once. The gray-bearded rider stared. You buried more? I told you. Depends how serious the fire gets. A younger angel near the porch almost laughed from sheer disbelief. Lady, what are you, some kind of doomsday saint? Martha looked at him once. I'm a widow who got tired of being surprised. She was already assembling the team in her head. You, she jabbed a finger at the chapter president, Graybeard, the prison-tattooed wiry rider, and two younger men who still had strong lungs and steady legs. Shovels, hooks, wet cloths. Nobody goes upright if they can help it. The trench gives some cover, but branches will be dropping and the smoke pools low. One man stays rear count. Nobody breaks line. The chapter president glanced toward the cellar and shelter. You're going, Yes. No. She turned to him so sharply he almost took a step back. Do not waste my time. You can't lead every run yourself. I can lead this one. You're needed here. Her face went hard enough to stop argument for half a second. I am needed where the water is. He held her gaze. Firelight moved in the bloodshot white of his eyes. The mountain roared. Men coughed behind them. Somewhere in the cellar, somebody retched from smoke and heat. Then he nodded once. Then I go with you. Good, Martha said. You keep your people from turning brave into stupid. They moved. The trench was little more than a gouge in the land, an old runoff line half overgrown in places and exposed rock in others. It dipped behind the chicken wire enclosure, crossed a patch of bare clay, then angled up toward a shallow ledge, where the hillside had been cut years ago for storage. In daylight, it would have been awkward. In ember rain under a burning sky, it felt like crawling through the throat of some ruined machine. Martha led from the front, with the lantern held low and hooded by her palm. Not because she needed much light. She was reading the land by memory. The chapter president was behind her. Graybeard carried one shovel. The wiry rider carried the second. The younger two took the hooks and extra wet cloths. Behind them came another broad biker whose neck burn had been wrapped, but who refused to stay back. You don't have to prove anything, the chapter president muttered to him. The man coughed black and said, didn't come this far to sit on a porch. The trench narrowed and the heat changed. Not cooler, not really, just less direct. The walls of dirt and stone cut some of the wind. Smoke drifted through in heavy folds, hugging the low ground exactly as Martha had predicted. Higher breaths, don't bury your face in the bottom air. Above them, whole branches came down somewhere in the dark with ugly snapping sounds. Sparks skated over the trench edge and vanished behind them. More than once, the men had to stop while a gust blew fire across the open ground to their right. The prison-tattooed rider looked up once and swore under his breath. This whole damn hill's lit. Then stop admiring it, Martha said. They pushed on. Back at the house, the split shelter system was holding by inches. Wade stayed at the cellar door like she had ordered, counting men, watching eyes, reporting who was getting too quiet. It gave him something to do other than listen to his own lungs trying to scare him to death. Deke, propped against the porch post, had started helping tear bandages and pass cloths one-handed. Leon drifted in and out of pain, but every time his eyes opened, he looked first toward the yard to make sure he had not been abandoned. He had not. Inside the storm shelter, with heat pressing through the metal and space so tight the men could feel each other breathe, something else was changing too. One of the biggest riders in the room, a scarred man with a shaved skull and hands like stone blocks, finally muttered in the dark, "I used to think old women out in the hills were all crazy." Another voice answered from somewhere near the back. "You still think that?" A pause, then, "No, I think this one's the reason we got another hour." Someone gave a dry cough that might have been a laugh. From the cellar came a different kind of change. The men there had begun talking lower. Less like men competing and more like men conserving. A bottle passed where it was needed without anyone grabbing. One rider with a split lip tore part of his own bandana for a brother whose cloth had dried out. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. Fear had not made them noble. It had made them honest. Up the trench, Martha stopped so suddenly the chapter president nearly ran into her back. She raised one hand. The men listened. At first, all they heard was the fire and the ragged drag of their own breathing through wet cloth. Then underneath a new sound, a faint metallic tapping. Martha turned her lantern toward the ledge. There the buried drums were hidden under a false cover made of scrap planks, dirt, and old lime sacks gone stiff with age. Only one rusted corner of metal showed through. Just enough that if you knew where to look, you could find it. The younger rider stared. Graybeard let out a rough sound, halfway between a cough and a laugh. "You really did bury the damn mountain." Martha dropped to one knee. Dig. Shovels bit dirt. Hooks tore at planks. The men worked low and fast, every movement sending up puffs of ash and dust. They uncovered one drum, then another, then a third, then another. All sealed. The chapter president gripped the rim of the first. "Heavy." "Because it's full," Martha said. "Be grateful." They got two drums loose and started dragging them into the trench on makeshift sling loops. The third stuck hard in packed soil. The broad biker with the wrapped neck went to help the wiry rider lever it free. That was when the hillside above them let go. It started with one sharp crack. Martha looked up instantly and screamed, "Down!" A burning branch, the thickness of a fence rail, came crashing over the trench lip, smashing into the ledge where the broad biker had been standing. The impact threw him sideways. Dirt and sparks exploded everywhere. Half the false cover collapsed after it, along with rock and burning debris from the brush above. When the dust and smoke cleared enough to see the broad biker was pinned from the thigh, down under the branch and a slab of broken plank. Flames chewing along the bark inches from his leg. He was trying not to scream, trying and failing. The younger men lunged toward him. "Stop," Martha snapped. "Not all at once." The chapter president dropped beside the pinned man. "Can you move it?" "No." Martha jammed the hook under the burning branch, but it barely shifted. Too much weight, too much angle, fire eating closer by the second. "We lift on 3, the chapter president barked. "Not straight up," Martha said. "Roll toward me, dirt first, mother the flame line." Graybeard and the wiry rider shoveled dirt over the burning bark, while the younger men wedged shoulders under the broken plank. The pinned biker's face had gone chalk gray under soot. "What's your name?" Martha demanded. He gritted his teeth. "Rafe. Rafe, when I say pull, you drag with us. Not before." He nodded so hard it looked like pain alone moved him. The chapter president set his boots. 3, 2, 1, now. They heaved. The branch rolled half an inch and stuck. Rafe screamed. "Again!" Martha shouted. They lifted harder. The younger rider nearest the end slipped, almost lost his grip, recovered. Graybeard kicked the branch sideways with both boots while Martha levered with the hook. This time it moved. "Pull!" Rafe tore his leg free as the branch rolled just enough to open a gap. The chapter president and Martha hauled him bodily into the trench while the bark flared back up where the dirt had fallen away. For 2 seconds, all of them stayed crouched over him, sucking bad air and checking whether the leg was broken. Rafe was shaking so hard, his teeth clicked. Still there. Legs still there. Martha ran both hands quickly down his shin and ankle. Burned, bruised, maybe sprained, not shattered. "You walk ugly, but you walk." He laughed once wildly, almost on the edge of tears. "That's your bedside manner." "That is me being encouraging." The chapter president looked at her, disbelieving, then gave one short bark of laughter in spite of everything. It vanished almost immediately into coughing, but it was there. They got the third drum free after that, though slower. Rafe stayed on his feet because stubbornness can be stronger than shock for a while. The return down the trench was worse than the approach. Each drum took 2 men to drag, sometimes 3. Smoke had pulled thicker now. The open ground to the right flashed and darkened as spot fires raced through the grass. Twice they had to stop and press against the trench wall while burning debris skidded across the lip overhead. Halfway back, the chapter president spoke without turning his head. "You still haven't answered why you stayed." Martha kept moving. "I did answer." "No, you told me your husband died. That explains grief, not staying." The men behind them listened without seeming to. In a fire, silence has ears. Martha stepped over a root, dragged the sling forward, then said, "Because everybody else wanted this land to become a warning." The chapter president frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means when people are afraid of a place, they like it empty. Makes the story cleaner. Man dies in a fire. Widow leaves, mountain wins, county forgets. I didn't like the ending." One of the younger riders behind them muttered almost reverently, "Jesus." "No, Martha said the same way she had before on the road. "Just me." When they came back into the yard hauling the drums, the reaction hit hard. Men on the porch actually stared. Wade at the cellar door blinked like he thought the smoke was making him hallucinate. Deke, pale and hurting, looked at the mud-caked water drums and said, "You went back out for that." Martha gave him a look. "What did you think survival ran on?" The drums changed the whole property at once. Not enough to make anyone safe. Enough to buy time. Enough to cool cloths, ration cups, treat burns, and keep ember traps from turning into structure fires every 5 minutes. The chapter president immediately put 3 men on measured distribution. No one argued. Even the way they handled the water had changed. Careful now, controlled, almost ceremonial. Rafe limped to the porch under his own power. Leon saw him and lifted 2 fingers in a weak salute from where he lay wrapped and sweating. Rafe answered with a nod and sank down against the steps. Eyes closed. Alive. Then the gray-bearded rider did a quick head count. His expression changed. He looked toward the trench, then at the men around him. Then back toward the trench again, like maybe smoke had hidden what Math was trying to say. "Hold up." The chapter president turned. "What?" Graybeard counted again, pointing at each face. "Martha, Yumi, Wade's here, Rafe, both kids, Deke, Leon, Rico, porch crew, cellar line, storm shelter, rotation." He stopped. All at once, the air in the yard felt different. "Where's Nolan?" No one answered because no one had seen him since the trench. The younger rider with the hook looked up confused first, then horrified. "He was rear count." Graybeard's voice dropped. "He was behind me coming out." The chapter president turned slowly toward the smoke-black cut in the hillside. The trench lay there, half hidden in ember drift, dark and narrow, and suddenly much longer than before. Martha didn't speak right away. She was listening, trying to hear one human sound through the roar of a mountain on fire. And for one awful second, there was nothing. Then from somewhere up the trench, a voice tore through the smoke. Not loud, not strong, just human. "Help!" Every man in the yard snapped toward it. The chapter president was already moving when Martha caught his sleeve. "Not all of you. He's alive for the next minute, maybe. If 6 men charge blind into that cut, I lose 7 instead of 1. The words hit like a slap because they were true. She pointed fast. You and you with me. Graybeard take yard command. Nobody leaves assigned positions. Keep water ration moving. Keep the cellar door rotation steady. If embers get under the porch again, kill them before they think." Graybeard nodded once. No argument. The chapter president grabbed a hook. One younger rider took a shovel, and the wiry prison-tattooed biker tore a wet cloth tighter across his face. Martha took the lantern and went first. They ran low through the ember drift toward the trench. Nolan's second cry came weaker, strangled by smoke. By the time they reached the bend, they could see what had happened. In the confusion after the branch collapse, a section of the trench lip had sloughed off. Dirt scrub and half-burning debris had come down behind the group's rear position, knocking Nolan sideways into a narrow pocket against the wall. His lower body was buried almost to the waist under loose soil and brush. One arm was pinned beneath a broken root. Fire was not on him yet, but it was close enough that the air around him looked alive. The younger rider swore. Jesus. Martha dropped to one knee. No wasted talk. Dig him from the legs first, not the chest. If that wall goes again, I want him free low. Nolan's face was nearly black with soot, except where tears had cut pale lines through it. He tried to speak, coughed, then managed. Thought you left. Martha shoved the lantern into the chapter president's hand and started clawing dirt away with both hands. I said nobody gets left on my property. The sentence did something to Nolan's face. It didn't calm him. It anchored him. The men dug fast, low and ugly, no finesse, just work. Dirt under fingernails, burning grit in their eyes, lungs scraping. The wiry biker got the shovel under the root trapping Nolan's arm and levered upward while the chapter president hauled loose brush clear. Martha braced one boot against the trench wall and pulled at Nolan's shoulder. Can you feel your legs? Yeah, both. I think so. Good. Then when this comes free, you stand immediately. No drama. He tried to laugh and only coughed harder. The wall shifted above them. All four looked up. A ribbon of dirt and ash trickled down. Now, Martha snapped. The chapter president heaved. The younger rider tore the root sideways, and Martha dragged Nolan out by the jacket front just as another chunk of trench lip collapsed where his hips had been pinned. Burning brush dropped into the hole a half-second later. They stumbled backward together. Nolan got one foot under him, then the other. His left knee buckled, but he stayed up because fear can keep a man vertical longer than pride ever could. Move, Martha shouted. They ran him back toward the yard while the trench behind them coughed smoke and sparks into the dark like it wanted one more chance. When they broke out into the open, a strange thing happened. Several men on the porch shouted. Not panic. Relief. Not for the water this time. For Nolan. Men who had known each other for years and men who had met 6 hours earlier all reacted like one body seeing a limb return before the bleeding got worse. Graybeard got Nolan by the shoulders. You ugly bastard. Nolan half laughed, half choked. Thought you were uglier. Save it, Martha said. He gets checked, then he drinks one cap only. The chapter president took one look around the yard and knew that while they had been gone, the fire had kept negotiating against them. The house was still standing, but the porch roof had begun to spit sparks from two hidden hotspots near the far corner. The storm shelter hatch was hot enough that men opening it had to use folded cloth. The root cellar air had turned fouler, and Wade's face at the door told the story before he spoke. Two getting confused. One keeps saying his brother's outside. His brother's in there with him. Martha's eyes narrowed. Heat and smoke. Rotate them up one at a time. And the wind changed, Graybeard said. That was the real bad news. Everyone could feel it now. The flow of air had shifted off the ridge and begun dragging cross-slope through the bowl. Not hard yet, but enough to push heat under structures that had been surviving on angles and luck. Martha turned slowly toward the property line. The main fire front had passed the worst of its initial push, leaving behind a black-red world of stumps, brush fires, falling limbs, and advancing secondary burns. For a few minutes and only a few, the yard no longer looked like immediate annihilation. Men noticed it. That was the danger. Temporary mercy makes people stupid. Dawn had not fully arrived, but the darkness was thinning to a dirty, bruised gray beyond the smoke. Shapes were coming back. Fence posts, the pump, the windmill, the cattle cut, the slope to the livestock bunker. For the first time all night, some of the riders looked at the sky and thought the same forbidden thought. Maybe we made it. Martha saw it in their faces and hated it immediately. No one relaxes. The chapter president heard the edge in her voice. What do you see? She lifted her chin toward the east slope. Smoke that had been lifting there was now flattening low and racing sideways through the black grass. Backburn, Graybeard frowned. From what? From everything that didn't finish the first time. Then the wind hit. Not a gust, a turn. It slammed through the bowl from the ravine side, drove sparks under the porch, flung embers against the barn wall, and sent a rolling blast of heat across the yard that made every man instinctively duck. Somewhere in the black timber beyond the property line, something big ignited with a whump. so deep it felt subterranean. The younger riders looked toward the tree line just as fire rose there again. Not the main wall this time. Worse in another way. Multiple smaller runs, splitting, joining, racing through what had been left behind, now driven straight toward the house from a new angle. The chapter president didn't need asking anymore. "We move." "Yes," Martha said, "now we move." The livestock bunker stood uphill and slightly west, stone-faced, half sunk into the ground with a heavy timber door and an earth berm behind it. It had always been the safest structure, but the open ground between had been too exposed under direct ember storm. Now, with the main crown run past and the wind shifted, this was the narrow window. Not safe, possible. Martha stepped onto the porch and shouted for everyone to hear. "Listen carefully, because I will not repeat this in pieces. The cellar and the shelter are done after the next push. We are relocating to the livestock bunker. Injured first. Strongest outside the line. Nobody runs ahead. Nobody stops unless I say stop. If you fall the men behind, you pick you up or go over you. You do not lie down on open ground. You do not turn back for gear. You take what water you can carry and nothing that slows your hands." Men started moving before she finished. That alone would have been impossible an hour earlier. Deke tried to get to his feet one-handed. Two riders moved to help him. Leon, pale and drenched in sweat, whispered, "Don't leave me outside." And this time 3 men answered him at once. "We got you." Rico could walk now, barely, with a wet rag over his face and one arm over Nolan's shoulders. Wade left the cellar count without being told and started bringing confused men up one by one, talking to them hard and steady so they'd follow his voice instead of the panic in their own heads. The storm shelter emptied next. Men came out blinking, drenched, cramped, angry at the air and grateful for it at the same time. The broad rider, Rafe, limped into position without complaint. Graybeard put him near the middle of the column where stronger bodies could absorb a stumble. Then in the middle of that controlled chaos, someone appeared at the edge of the barn. At first, the men nearest the porch thought it was a shadow. Then it moved. A rider. Burned, staggering, half black with soot. One sleeve gone. Beard singed almost to the skin. He came in from the smoke carrying something clutched against his chest under his jacket. Several men shouted at once. "Holy hell! Thought you were dead. Where'd he come from?" Martha was off the porch and across the yard in seconds. It was Leon's road partner. The one no one had realized was still unaccounted for because the night had been devouring names faster than anyone could track them. His eyes were wild, unfocused, but he was upright by pure refusal. "What were you doing?" the chapter president barked. The rider looked past him to Martha and pulled the object from under his jacket. A small metal box. Smoke darkened. Old steel corners. One side dented. "Found it." Martha stopped dead. For the first time that night, the men saw her control slip by a fraction. Not fear, something older, deeper. The rider swayed where he stood. Barn floor split when the heat hit. Saw this under the boards. Didn't know what it was. Knew it mattered, so I went back. Martha took the box from him with both hands. Everything in her face changed, and then changed back so fast most of them would have missed it if the whole yard had not been watching her for survival cues. Her thumb moved once over the scorched lid like she was making sure it was real. The chapter president saw it. "What is it?" "Something that should have burned years ago." That answer told them nothing and told them enough. It mattered deeply. The rider who brought it in finally collapsed to one knee. "Thought maybe you'd want it." Martha handed the box to Deke without even looking at him. "Hold this. If you drop it, I resurrect you just to kill you properly." Deke, shocked into perfect care, clutched it to his chest with his good arm. The rider on one knee coughed and looked up at Martha. "Did I miss the easy part?" "No, you arrived in time for the stupid part." The next wave of heat crossed the yard and settled the question of timing. A line of sparks ran under the barn eave. The porch corner flared. Somewhere behind the house, a stack of old fencing lit all at once with a dry, rushing sound. The bowl was about to cook from both sides. "Move," Martha shouted. "Column now." They formed fast. 2 strong riders carried Leon between them. Rico and Nolan kept each other upright. Deke stayed near the center with the box jammed under his arm like it was more fragile than his own bones. Wade took rear middle, watching for confusion and drop-offs the way Martha had taught him without ever saying she was teaching him. Graybeard and the chapter president took the outer positions with 3 more of the least injured men. Martha went in front, then they left the house. The run to the bunker was not a run at all. It only looked that way from fear. In truth, it was a brutal, stumbling, disciplined push through open ground, under ember drift and crosswind, uphill over dirt already hot through the soles of their boots. "Keep low," Martha shouted. "Close it up," the chapter president roared. "Don't break line." The first 10 yards were the worst because that was where instinct screamed to sprint. Men wanted speed. Martha wanted shape. Shape was survival. A branch came down hard off the black skeleton of a pine near the fence and clipped one rider on the shoulder. He spun, nearly went down, got grabbed, kept moving. Leon cried out when his carriers hit a rut, but they did not stop. Deke almost lost the box, clamped it harder, and drove on. Rafe's limp got uglier by the step, but he stayed in rhythm because there was no room in the line for separate suffering. Halfway to the bunker, the wind shifted again and fire rolled through the dead grass behind them. Graybeard looked over his shoulder once and swore with real awe. The yard they had just left was beginning to vanish in sparks. "Faster!" someone yelled. "Not faster!" Martha shouted back. "Tighter!" That saved them seconds later when one of the confused cellarmen faltered and started turning sideways, disoriented by smoke. Wade slammed into him, shoulder first, corrected his direction, and shoved him forward again before the gap could open. The bunker loomed closer. Stone front, heavy door, black iron latch. Hope did something dangerous to the line. Men surged. Martha spun and cut them with her voice. "Hold formation." The chapter president echoed it with a snarl that stopped the surge from becoming a pileup. They reached the bunker in layers. First the front, then injured, then middle, then rear cover. Graybeard and 2 others yanked the door open. Cool, dark air breathed out from inside like another world. "In," Martha shouted. Leon went first, then Deke with the box, then Rico, Nolan, Wade's confused man, the burned rider from the barn, Rafe, Graybeard, half the outer ring, the rest in fast, hard sequence. The interior was larger than the storm shelter. Stone-lined, low-beamed, filled with old feed racks and winter storage hooks. Cramped for 57, but survivable. Much more survivable. The chapter president held the door as the last men came through. "Count," he yelled. Voices in the dark started throwing numbers. Martha turned once, just once, to look back toward the house. From here, she could see it through smoke and new flame. Still standing, still stubborn. Porch roof glowing at the corner. Windmill behind it like a skeletal witness. The property looked less like land and more like memory, already trying to become ash. Then she heard it. A scream. Not from inside the bunker. Not from the line. From beyond the burned tree line west of the house. Human. Thin. Farther out than any of her people should have been. The chapter president heard it too. "Who's missing?" Voices in the bunker overlapped, counting again, names thrown sharp and fast in the dark. Martha didn't wait for the answer. She took one step back from the doorway. The chapter president saw it and grabbed for her arm. "No," she tore free. "There's someone out there. We don't even know if it's ours." Martha's face in the firelight looked older than before and harder than all of them. "That has never been my first question." And before anyone inside the bunker could stop her, Martha Bell turned back toward the burning property and disappeared into the smoke. The smoke swallowed her almost instantly. 1 second, Martha Bell was framed in the bunker doorway by firelight and flying ash. The next, she was a dark, moving shape, cutting downhill through the red-gray haze. Lantern low, shoulders set, not hurrying the way frightened people hurried, but moving with that terrible, purposeful speed she used when she had already made the decision and considered everything after it a delay. The chapter president slammed one hand against the bunker door frame hard enough to shake dust loose from the stone. "Damn it!" Then he looked inside at the men packed shoulder to shoulder in the dim interior. Injured, coughing, burned, half blind with smoke and exhaustion. And he understood the problem exactly the way Martha would have understood it. He could not take everyone. He could not take no one. He pointed fast. "Graybeard, you hold the bunker. Nobody breaks out. Nobody crowds the door. And if this place lights, somehow you get them to the back wall and low. Wade, you help with counts and breathing checks? Rico, stay down. Deke, you don't move with that arm. You three outside with me. The men he chose were the least wrecked of the lot. The prison-tattooed wiry rider. Nolan, despite the trench collapse, because he still had his legs and more anger than sense. And Rafe, because even limping, he kept refusing to die politely. Graybeard looked at Rafe's leg. He's not right. Rafe spat into the dirt. Good thing we ain't going dancing. The chapter president didn't waste another word. He pulled the wet cloth higher over his face and went after Martha. Outside, the mountain had changed again. The house yard they had just crossed was now a shifting field of sparks and rolling heat. The porch corner was fully burning. The barn wall pulsed with orange in the cracks. Embers moved through the air in long diagonal streams driven by the crosswind. And every few seconds, some deeper pocket of brush or timber would ignite with a thudding rush that made the whole slope seem alive. The scream came again, fainter. To the west this time, beyond the black line of trees where the ground dropped toward the ravine. "Martha," the chapter president shouted. No answer. Then Nolan pointed. There. Her lantern flashed once through the smoke ahead and below, vanished, then flashed again. They pushed toward it. The run from the bunker to the ravine edge was worse than it looked from above. The ground was uneven, littered with half-burned brush, hidden roots, blackened rocks that held heat like iron from a forge. Twice Nolan nearly went down when ash-covered holes opened beneath his boots. Rafe's limp got uglier with every step, but he kept pace by locking his jaw and saying nothing. The wiry rider moved like an animal built for bad terrain, low and quick and angry at every branch that struck him. When they reached Martha, she was kneeling beside a man in yellow firefighting gear, half buried under a tangle of burned limbs near the ravine lip. Not a biker, a firefighter. His helmet had been knocked away. One side of his face was black with soot and blistered red under it. He was conscious, but only barely. One glove scraping weakly at the debris, pinning his left shoulder and chest. 10 feet farther downslope, almost invisible in the smoke, another yellow-coated figure lay twisted near a burned stump. The chapter president stared. "You came back for firefighters." Martha didn't look up. "I came back for voices. Start lifting." That ended the question. They dropped beside ear. The pinned firefighter tried to speak. Failed. Coughed. Got a mouthful of smoke for the effort. "Don't," Martha said. "Save it." The chapter president got both hands under a charred limb and swore. "This thing's wedged." "Then unwedge it." Nolan and the wiry rider started clearing smaller branches while Rafe planted himself on the uphill side and used his good leg to brace against sliding ground. The ravine edge here was unstable, ash over dirt over old roots, and every movement threatened to send more debris down over the man they were trying to free. The second firefighter downslope made a sound then, a hoarse, broken groan. The chapter president looked toward him, then back at the one under the limbs. "We split." "No," Martha said instantly. "One dead man helps nobody. Free this one first." They worked low and fast. Under the top layer of burned branches was a heavier crosspiece from a fallen sapling trunk, jammed under a rock lip. The chapter president and Rafe tried to lever it and got almost nothing. Nolan got the hook under one side. The wiry rider tore away brush around the trapped man's legs. Martha slid her arm into the gap and checked quickly along Rib's shoulder neck. Still breathing. Good enough. Left arm may be busted. Chest's taking weight. He needs out now. The firefighter finally forced out 2 words. "Tommy, down." "Tommy can wait 10 seconds, Martha said. "You can't." The chapter president gritted his teeth. "On 3. Roll, don't lift. We roll it uphill." "Do it," Martha said. They heaved. Nothing. Again. This time the trunk shifted half an inch with a deep grinding sound. The firefighter screamed. "Again," Martha shouted. All 5 men and 1 furious old woman put everything into it. The trunk rolled just enough for Martha to yank the firefighter clear by the back of his coat, while Nolan dragged his lower body free. They all fell backward in the ash together, coughing, blinded for a second by the burst of sparks that followed. The freed firefighter sucked in one terrible breath and nearly blacked out from pain. Martha slapped his good shoulder. "Stay here. Stay with me." Then she was already moving downslope toward the second firefighter. The chapter president caught up beside her. You know these men? I know what they are. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer because the ravine side suddenly gave way under her right boot. The dirt collapsed in a dirty slide, and Martha went down hard onto one knee, then one hand skidding toward the drop where the second firefighter lay tangled in burned brush. Nolan lunged and grabbed the back of her jacket just before she slid farther. For one instant, everybody saw how old she actually was. Not weak, never that, but human. Thin under the work coat, lungs laboring, hands shaking for the first time all night when she pushed herself back up. Then the moment was gone. She tore free of Nolan's grip, got her footing, and kept going. The second firefighter, Tommy, had it worse. A broken branch had speared through his turnout coat and pinned the fabric into the ground without entering his body, but it had trapped him face down at an angle that made breathing almost impossible. One leg lay in a patch of heat-blackened brush that was beginning to smoke again. His radio harness was twisted under him. Every breath sounded wet. Martha dropped beside him. "Tommy, hear me," a groan. "Good, that's enough." The chapter president crouched opposite her. "Can we cut the coat?" "Yes, but not wrong. If you pin the fabric harder, he suffocates." The wiry rider handed over his knife. Martha sliced the trapped turnout coat at the shoulder seam, the side, then the waist, working the blade with the steady precision of someone whose hands had done difficult things under bad pressure before. Nolan and Rafe pulled the pinned fabric free in sections, while the chapter president lifted Tommy's chest by inches so the cloth wouldn't drag him back down. Tommy cried out once, "Weak and raw!" Then the ground above them popped. All heads turned upward. A burning stump near the ravine edge had finally let go. It tipped, rolled once, and started coming toward them through sparks and loose dirt. "Move!" Nolan yelled. No one had room. The chapter president shoved Tommy's upper body sideways while Martha took the full force of the last pull, dragging him by both shoulder straps across the slope. The stump crashed past where Tommy had been pinned a half-second before, clipped the chapter president in the hip, and exploded against a rock farther down, spraying cinders over all of them. Martha hit the dirt flat, still holding Tommy's straps. For 2 beats, she didn't get up. The chapter president rolled toward her. "Martha," she coughed once, sucked in smoke, coughed again, then shoved herself onto an elbow. "I'm not dead. Pick him up." That was the only answer she gave. Between the 6 of them, they got both firefighters moving uphill. The first one half-carried between Nolan and Rafe. Tommy dragged and lifted in ugly stages by Martha, the chapter president, and the wiry rider. The ravine edge behind them kept shedding ash and burning brush. Fire was creeping lower through the dead grass now. Not racing, but surrounding, cutting off paths inch by inch. When they reached flatter ground, Tommy's radio crackled. At first it was just static. Then a burst of broken voices. "Unit 4, respond. Anybody on West Ridge?" Tommy tried to answer and only coughed blood-flecked spit into his sleeve. The chapter president looked at Martha. "Can he use it?" "Maybe not him." She snatched the radio mic, thumbed it, and said with brutal clarity, "This is Martha Bell on the Bell property, West Ridge. I have 2 county volunteers alive and multiple civilians sheltered uphill. Repeat, alive." Only static answered. She tried again. "Do you copy?" A voice broke through for half a second, shredded by interference. "All souls. Ridge presumed? No access." Then static swallowed it again. The chapter president looked at her. Martha looked back at the dead radio mic for one moment longer than she needed to. "They think we're dead," Nolan said quietly. No one contradicted him because it was probably true. They pushed on. The return to the bunker became a slow, punishing relay. Rafe nearly collapsed twice under the weight of the first firefighter, but kept moving because Nolan swore at him like a brother, and that somehow helped. The wiry rider took Tommy's legs when the chapter president's shoulders started shaking from strain. Martha stayed at Tommy's upper body even after it was obvious every pull hurt her ribs from the ravine fall. She would not let go of him. At the bunker door, Graybeard and Wade were already outside waiting, having seen the shapes coming through smoke. Then the first firefighter lifted his head. His eyes found Martha through the soot, the blood, the ruined night. For a second he looked détruit. Then something like recognition cut through the pain. "No way." Martha ignored him. Inside first. But he kept staring at her as Graybeard and Wade took his weight. I know you. The chapter president glanced from the firefighter to Martha. You do. The man coughed hard, winced, and forced the words out. County Training Hall, years ago, disaster volunteer seminar. They brought in survivors from older incidents to talk common mistakes. He blinked at Martha like he was trying to line up memory with what he was seeing. You were the woman from the Granger fire. Nobody moved for a beat. Inside the bunker, men shifted in the dimness, listening despite their pain. The firefighter swallowed. They said you pulled 3 kids and a deputy out of a burned school bus after the Canyon Road collapse. They said you stayed in the fire zone after everybody else pulled back. Martha's face closed. It was a long time ago. The first firefighter gave a weak, disbelieving laugh that turned into a groan. I thought they were exaggerating. Graybeard stared at her. A burned school bus? Wade looked like he had forgotten to breathe again, but for a completely different reason this time. The chapter president said nothing. He was recalculating the whole woman in front of him and hating how late he was to it. Tommy, barely conscious, muttered from under the hands lifting him. Told you. Bell, I knew the name. Martha cut through all of it like a blade. Later, get them in. That got the bunker moving again. Inside, the stone-lined space had become a place of heat, breath, pain, and a new kind of silence. Not hopeless. Focused. When the firefighters came through the doorway, men shifted without complaint to make room. Leon, half-drugged on exhaustion and pain, rolled his body 3 inches, even though it hurt like hell, because that was all the room he had to give. Deke tucked the metal box tighter under one arm and helped clear a space with the other. Rico passed up his damp cloth for Tommy's face. No speeches, no drama, just accommodation in the dark. Martha knelt between the 2 firefighters and checked them with the same unsentimental efficiency she used on everyone else. The first one was bad, but stable enough if the shoulder stayed immobilized, and he didn't slide into shock faster than they could warm and cool him in turns. Tommy worried her more, breathing too wet, too shallow, possible cracked ribs, maybe worse, but alive. Still alive. The chapter president crouched beside her. Tell me what you need. Martha gave him a look. You asking or obeying? For the first time he answered without any trace of challenge. Both. That earned him the smallest nod she had ever given. Support his ribs with folded blankets. Not pressure. Keep his airway clear. If he vomits, roll him. Small sips only if he can swallow. And I need that radio near me in case the mountain remembers mercy. He handed it over. For a while, there was no room for anything except the work of staying alive. Men breathed, men coughed, men held cloths over burns in each other's mouths. The bunker smelled of wet ash, blood leather, earth, old hay, and overheated bodies. Outside, the fire moved past in waves, sometimes loud enough to shake grit from the ceiling timbers. Sometimes strangely far away, like it had gone hunting somewhere else and might yet remember them. Then the first firefighter spoke again, weaker now, but clearer. You know what they said about you. Martha didn't look up from Tommy's bandage. No. They said when the road captain from County Command told everyone the bus was gone, you walked past him anyway. A few riders in the bunker lifted their eyes. The firefighter's voice dragged, but he kept going. They said you came out carrying 1 kid and pulling another, went back again for the 3rd. Graybeard exhaled slowly in the dark. Wade muttered almost to himself, Jesus. Martha tied off the blanket support around Tommy and said, they forgot the deputy. The firefighter blinked, then despite the pain smiled faintly. So they did. The chapter president leaned back against the stone wall and looked at her as if the answer to something had just arrived too late to be useful and exactly in time to matter. You do this often. Martha wiped soot off her wrist with the edge of a rag. Only when people insist on being where death is busiest. That actually drew a few exhausted, rough laughs out of the men, and the sound was almost shocking in that bunker. Small, harsh, human. It loosened something. Not enough to make anyone safe. Enough to remind them they still belonged to the living. Then the radio crackled. Every head turned, static first, then a dispatcher's voice thin and chewed apart by interference. West Ridge, no survivability. Repeat. All unaccounted personnel and civilian groups on Upper West Ridge presumed deceased pending daylight access. No one in the bunker made a sound. The words just hung there in the heat and dark. Presumed deceased. Martha took the radio in both hands and pressed transmit. Her voice when she answered was low, steady, and hard enough to cut stone. You tell whoever's listening that the dead are breathing up here. The radio hissed back static, then a broken fragment of reply. Then nothing at all. Outside, the mountain roared once more. Inside the bunker, 57 Hells Angels, 2 county firefighters, and 1 old woman listened to the world bury them before sunrise. For a long time after the radio went dead, nobody in the bunker said a word. It was not silence the way churches had silence or hospitals or empty roads at dawn. It was the silence of men hearing themselves erased while still breathing. Presumed deceased. The phrase sat in the air heavier than smoke. Wade was the first to move. He took a slow breath through the damp cloth, looked around the bunker, and started counting again under his breath, almost like he needed the numbers more than the answer. Martha sat against the stone beside Tommy and adjusted the folded blankets around his ribs. Her hands were steady again. Whatever the radio had done to everyone else, it had only made her narrower, sharper, more exact. The chapter president lowered himself beside the opposite wall with a grunt that told the truth his face wouldn't. He was hurting now. Hip from the ravine strike, lungs from smoke, shoulders from carrying dead weight uphill. Graybeard sat next to him and passed him a cap full of water without asking. He drank half and handed the rest back. No, finish it. The chapter president shook his head. Not while I can still swallow pride. That got a few tired breaths of laughter out of the dark. Across from them, Leon lay with his burns wrapped, eyes half shut, lips dry and cracked. Deke sat beside him, the small metal box still held tight against his chest, with his good arm like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Rico leaned back against the stone, breathing easier now than earlier but still shallow. Nolan sat with his knees up, head tipped against the wall, soot ground into every line of his face. Rafe's leg was stretched out badly, his boot half unlaced to keep swelling from choking it. No one looked dangerous anymore, only worn down, burned down, real. One of the younger riders, a man with a scar through one eyebrow and a voice too rough for his age, spoke into the dimness. I got a girl in Tucson. Nobody answered at first. He rubbed both hands over his face. 7 years old. Last time I saw her, she had a backpack bigger than her whole body and cried because she thought school buses were monsters. Leon opened one eye. You got pictures. Used to. Used to means no. The younger rider stared at the dirt between his boots. Her mother threw most of it out. No one made it sentimental. No one told him it would be okay. Graybeard only asked, Name Ellie. That made the bunker change. Another rider farther back said, Mine's 12. Haven't seen him in 3 birthdays. Rafe gave a dry, crooked smile. Show off. The man snorted once, then coughed. Kid won't even know my voice now. Martha kept working on Tommy's bandage, but she was listening. Everybody was. The chapter president looked across the dim bunker at the man who had spoken first. Why'd you join? The younger rider shrugged. Prison got out before I did. A few men gave short, humorless laughs of recognition. He cleared his throat. Came out with no home, no work, no use. Club was the first place that looked at me like I was already somebody. Not a problem waiting to happen. Graybeard nodded once. That's how it starts. That how it started for you. Graybeard leaned his head back against the stone. Started because a man fed me when I had no money and broke another man's hand for touching my little sister. Seemed like sound logic at the time. More tired laughter. Even Martha's mouth moved by a fraction. Then Deke looked down at the metal box and said quietly, You want this back now? The bunker settled again. Martha finally raised her eyes. For a second, nobody spoke. Fire muttered outside in the distance. The bunker ceiling ticked from heat and cooling. Then Martha held out her hand. Deke gave her the box like he was handing over something alive. It was old steel, darkened by smoke, edges worn smooth by years of being touched before being buried. Martha rested it on her knees but did not open it right away. The chapter president watched her. You don't have to if it makes this worse. Martha gave him a look. That ship burned about 40 years ago. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, were old letters, two military patches, a silver cigarette lighter blackened by time, and a photograph. The younger riders leaned without meaning to. Martha lifted the photograph first. Even through soot and fading, the image was clear enough. Three young men in work jackets standing beside two motorcycles from another era, all chrome and heavy lines. One of the men was Martha's husband, younger and broad-shouldered, smiling in the rare, careless way of someone who still believed life might be fair. Beside him stood two patched riders, not Hell's Angels then by the old insignia, but cut from the same road-borne cloth. On the back, in faded ink, was written one line: "Paid in blood, returned in loyalty." No one in the bunker spoke. Martha set the photo in her lap and touched one of the letters with two fingers. My husband hauled freight before the fire. Mountain roads, county lines, bad weather, worse people. One winter night, a bridge iced over outside Balar Gap. A bike club went through the rail. Truckers kept driving. Most of them said they never saw a thing. She looked down at the photograph. He stopped. Graybeard's voice was quieter now. How many? Two out of the river, one dead before he reached the bank. He ruined his shoulder for life, dragging the others clear. The chapter president leaned forward slightly, and they remembered. Martha gave the faintest shrug. The good ones always do. She opened one of the letters and looked at the handwriting for a moment before folding it shut again. They came by for years after. Coffee, fence repairs, parts, quiet kind of gratitude. Then time did what time does. Men died, clubs changed, roads changed. My husband died in the Granger fire. After that, mostly the mountain and me. Deke stared at the photo. So when we showed up on the road, I didn't see patches first, Martha said. I saw debt. Nobody had an answer for that. Leon, drifting in and out through pain, whispered, "That's a hell of a way to keep books." Martha slid the photograph back into the box. It's the only way that counts. Tommy stirred and coughed wetly. Wade moved instantly to help roll him. Rico passed up a cloth. Nolan steadied Tommy's shoulder. The motion through the bunker was quick now, almost practiced. Outside, the fire changed pitch. Every head lifted, not louder, closer in a different way. The low mutter beyond the stone walls sharpened into a rushing, pressurized sound, like a giant furnace door opening somewhere just beyond sight. Martha was already closing the box. The last burn over. The chapter president rose halfway despite the pain in his hip. You sure? She looked toward the bunker door. The first front stripped fuel. The second chased what was left. This one eats what survived both. Graybeard swore softly. Wade's breathing started to climb again, but this time he caught himself before panic did. What do we do? Martha stood. Same thing we've done all night. Low, tight, quiet, wet cloths over every face. No one opens that door unless the stone itself starts to fail. The bunker moved as one body. Men shifted down the walls. Cloths were wetted from the measured reserve. The firefighters were braced. Leon clenched his jaw against the pain as Graybeard and Deke helped angle him away from the draft cracks. Rafe dragged his bad leg in closer. Nolan put one hand flat on the earth floor like he could feel the mountain thinking through it. Then the first impact hit, not on the door, overhead. Something large and burning struck the berm above the bunker and rolled. Dust sifted from the beams. A second hit followed, then a third. The air itself seemed to tighten. Heat pressed at the cracks around the doorframe in a dry, vicious wave. Tommy muttered something incoherent. The younger rider with the daughter shut his eyes and whispered, "Ellie." The chapter president looked at Martha. Martha did not look back. She stood near the door with one hand on the radio and the other on the old metal box, as if she meant to hold both the past and the living in place by force. Then the world outside turned into one continuous roaring wall, and every line of light around the bunker door went pure orange. The bunker held, not because the mountain had spared them, not because the fire had weakened. It held because stone earth and old stubborn workmanship took the beating, instead of flesh. For long minutes, the world outside was nothing but impact pressure and heat. Burning timber struck the berm overhead and rolled. Sparks forced their way through cracks and died on wet cloth and dirt. The air inside turned so hot men had to breathe through their teeth to keep from choking on it. Every few seconds, the roar outside deepened into something almost mechanical, as if the whole ridge had become one giant furnace and they were trapped inside the wall beside it. Wade shut his eyes and counted breaths. Graybeard kept one hand on Leon's shoulder every time the burned man started shaking. The chapter president braced himself against the doorframe, ready for it to fail. Martha never moved from her place. One hand on the radio, one hand on the metal box, head slightly bowed, listening not to fear but to structure, to shifts in the earth, to the language of strain. Then just as brutally as it had arrived, the worst of it passed. Not silence, never silence, but the roar broke apart, first into separate crashes, then into scattered runs of brush, then into the ugly crackle of a mountain still burning without the same unified hunger. Nobody spoke for several seconds because nobody trusted it. The chapter president was first. "That it?" Martha kept listening. Another branch rolled over the berm, heat still pressed through the door seams. Somewhere outside, something large collapsed with a distant boom. Then she nodded once. That was the last full run. The words moved through the bunker like water. Men didn't cheer, they exhaled. Some bowed their heads. One rider laughed once in disbelief, then started coughing so hard Wade had to steady him. Tommy opened his eyes for 2 seconds, saw Martha still standing there, and seemed to understand enough to stop fighting the pain. Graybeard muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." "No," Martha said, "just delayed." That got a few rough laughs, and this time they lasted a little longer. When at last she opened the bunker door, morning was waiting. Not sunrise in any beautiful sense, just light, thin, gray, dirty, filtering through smoke over a world that looked half erased. The ridge was black, trees stood in burned skeletons, brush had become ash fields. Fence lines were broken, half buried, or simply gone. The yard below was a scar of churned dirt, smoking posts and glowing debris. Martha's house still stood somehow, though one corner of the porch had burned through and the roof looked blistered and tired. The barn was wrecked on one side but not fully lost. The windmill remained upright, twisted and blackened like a survivor, too stubborn to lie down. Men came out slowly, blinking into the dead light. The Hells Angels who had entered the mountain, loud armored and untouchable, now emerged, limping, wrapped in cloth, smoke-blackened, carrying one another by instinct. 2 firefighters came out with them. Martha stepped last, looked over the property once, and did not waste 1 second on shock. Check for spot fires, structure line first. No wandering. They moved immediately. The chapter president sent men to the house corner, the barn wall, the brush edge near the trench. Graybeard and Nolan worked the remains of the porch flare with dirt and the last measured water. Wade helped Tommy sit against the bunker wall while Rico checked Deke's bandage. Leon, half conscious, still tried to ask whether anybody had been left outside. Rafe answered before Martha could. No one. That was enough for him. By mid-morning, the first rescue crews reached the ridge. They came up slow, stunned, expecting bodies. Instead, they found Martha Bell standing in the black yard with soot on her face. 57 Hells Angels alive around her, 2 county firefighters breathing, and a property that looked as if it had personally fought the fire and refused to lose cleanly. The lead responder stopped dead. Behind him, another man lowered his radio and just stared. One of the younger bikers, too exhausted to stand straight, gave a cracked grin through split lips. You boys look disappointed. No one laughed except Graybeard, and even that came out as a cough. The firefighters were recognized first, then the numbers started sinking in, then the questions. How many survived? How long were you here? Who organized the shelter? Who treated the burns? Who made the move to the bunker? Every answer led back to Martha. She kept brushing them off with the same economy she had used all night. Water there, burns first. That roof still needs watching. Ask him, he carried worse than I did, but the truth was already too large to hide. The firefighter said her name. The riders said her name. The yard itself said her name in every buried drum, every saved structure, every life still standing. Then county officials arrived, and the first thing one of them asked was not how many people she had saved. It was whether this property had been properly registered for emergency shelter use. The chapter president turned so slowly it scared even his own men. Martha only looked at the official for a long second, ash drifting between them in the daylight. Son, if I had waited for your paperwork, you'd be counting corpses. No one around them argued with that, but Martha saw it immediately in their faces. Clipboards, liability, assessment, land value, damage reports. The fire was barely out, and already smaller men were thinking about ownership instead of survival. She said nothing else. By afternoon, the riders were being processed, checked, and moved in groups. Some left on recovery transport. Some refused to leave until they knew Martha would remain on her land. The chapter president stood with her near the ruined porch before he finally had to step away. He looked at the black ridge, the ruined yard, the old woman beside him. This isn't over. Martha followed his gaze to the road below where smoke still drifted in low ribbons. No, now it starts. For 2 days after the fire, the mountain smelled like wet ash, melted plastic, and things nobody could rebuild. Martha stayed on the property. That alone offended people, not the men who had survived there, not the firefighters, not the exhausted rescue crews who had walked the ridge and seen what she had done with almost nothing. Them she understood. They looked at the scorched house, the burned porch corner, the black yard, the half-dead windmill, and saw endurance. But the town looked at Martha Bell and saw a problem that had failed to solve itself. By the third morning, the first rumors started moving faster than the truth. Some said she had hidden bikers illegally and interfered with evacuation protocol. Some said the Hells Angels were exaggerating, turning a bad fire into some outlaw legend, because that was what men like that did. Others claimed the firefighters would have survived anyway, that the bunker story was nonsense, that old Martha Bell had just gotten lucky, and now people were romanticizing it. Martha heard all of it through other mouths and answered none of it. She patched what she could, nailed temporary boards where the porch had opened up, covered the split roof section with tarps from the old winter shed, checked the trench, checked the bunker, checked the remaining water drums. Grief, damage, pain. She processed them all the same way, with a list in both hands. The county came on the fourth day, 2 white trucks, clean tires, clipboards. The lead man introduced himself as Deputy Assessor Martin Keene, though the way he stood at the edge of her yard made it clear he considered ash beneath his boots a personal insult. With him came a woman from emergency management and another man from county planning who looked at Martha's Ridge the way people look at numbers on a map, not land, value. Keene glanced over the blackened property. Mrs. Bell, given the extent of the damage, this site may need to be condemned pending safety review. Martha kept hammering a board into place over the side porch frame. Then review it. Keene cleared his throat. There are also questions about unauthorized sheltering activity during the emergency. She drove in another nail. You mean the part where people lived? The woman from emergency management shifted awkwardly. The planner said nothing. He was studying the road line below the property, the utility corridor farther out, the burned tree cut, the flattened space beyond the ridge. Measuring, imagining. Martha saw him see it. That was when the real shape of the thing showed itself. This was not just paperwork. Before the fire, the county had been pressing her quietly for years. Easement requests, access discussions, regional improvement plans, a widened road cut, utility expansion, a future scenic pull-off, all of it needing one thing from her, the ridge. She had refused every time. Now the house was burned, the land was scarred, and they had arrived not with condolences, but with forms. Keene opened a folder. If the property is deemed structurally compromised and emergency access inadequate, the county may be forced to recommend acquisition under Hazard Mitigation Authority. Martha stopped hammering. Very slowly she turned. Acquisition. Keene tried to soften his voice and failed. In cases like this, it can be the most practical outcome. For who? No one answered. Down in town, the surviving riders were already answering in their own way. Phone calls first. Quiet ones, then longer ones, then chapter to chapter. Word spreading out across county lines and state lines with the speed of an old promise waking up. Men who had been on the ridge spoke to men who had not. Firefighters added their testimony. Someone passed along Martha's name. Someone else passed along the number 57. Someone added the part about the bunker. Another added the part about the old woman on the road with the lantern and shotgun. Each retelling stripped out less than expected and carried more than rumor usually could, because this one was true. Back on the property, Keene left behind a packet thick enough to insult the mailbox. Martha set it unopened on the kitchen table. That evening, the chapter president returned alone in a borrowed truck, moving slower now, with the hip he'd taken at the ravine. He found Martha on the porch steps drinking coffee that tasted of smoke because everything did. She handed him the second cup without asking why he was there. He sat beside her and looked over the yard. They came, yes. What did they want? My grave while I'm still upright. He gave a short, grim smile. Sounds like county work. Martha nodded toward the packet inside. Hazard mitigation, safety review, acquisition. His face hardened at the last word. There it is. You expected this. I expected smaller men to show up once bigger flames were done. He took a drink, then looked out toward the road below. You won't win polite against people like that. Martha's voice stayed flat. I never counted on polite. He studied her profile for a second. Good. She looked over. You planning something? He stood. Not me. Us. Before she could ask what that meant, a sound rolled up faint from the highway below. Not one engine. Many. Too far to count. Too steady to ignore. The chapter president listened once, then put the coffee down untouched on the porch rail. Martha rose slowly beside him. The sound grew. Low at first, then layered, then unmistakable. Motorcycles, a lot of them. Far more than 57, far more than a chapter run. The chapter president looked toward the smoke-blue distance beyond the burned trees and said, almost under his breath, well, word traveled faster than I thought. Martha stared at the road where the first glints of chrome were just beginning to catch the dying light. And then the whole valley started to rumble. The rumble kept growing until the porch boards vibrated under Martha's boots. At first it sounded like weather trapped in the valley, then like distant machinery, then like war. She stepped off the porch and moved to the edge of the yard, one hand resting against the hammer still tucked into her belt. The chapter president stood a few feet behind her, not smiling, not speaking, just watching the road below with its expression of a man who knew exactly what was coming and still respected it enough not to narrate it. The first riders appeared through the haze in a line of glinting chrome and black frames. Then 10 became 50. 50 became 200. Then the highway disappeared. Motorcycles poured into the valley in waves, climbing out of the smoke-dark road from both directions. Filling the burned corridor below the ridge with a moving river of headlights, steel-patched leather cargo trailers, flatbeds, pickup escorts, and row after row after row of riders. The sound hit the mountain face and came back doubled. A rolling thunder so huge it made the broken windmill tremble. Men were coming from everywhere. Different cuts, different chapters, different states. Some older, some young, some scarred like old roads. Some riding machines so polished they looked untouched by the world. But they all came the same way, steady, deliberate, not reckless, not playing at spectacle. This was not a parade. It was an answer. Rescue crews still working the lower roads stopped what they were doing and simply stared. County deputies near the temporary barricades stepped back instinctively as the line kept growing and growing until it no longer looked countable. Town people who had come only to watch the aftermath of the fire began pulling off the shoulder and climbing onto truck beds and fence rails just to see over the smoke. And still more motorcycles came. Martha stood in the blackened yard without moving. For the first time since the fire began, she looked genuinely overwhelmed. Not frightened, not confused, just struck by the size of something too large to fit into one human expectation. Her eyes tracked the road, then the valley, then the long, endless procession still climbing into view. The chapter president spoke quietly beside her. Told you it wasn't over. Martha didn't answer. The lead bikes turned off the road first, rolling slowly up the access cut toward her property. Not charging, not revving for show, just coming in with the solemn precision of men arriving somewhere that mattered. When they reached the yard, engines began to die. One by one at first, then in clusters, then in long, rippling rows. The thunder faded into ticking metal, drifting smoke, and boots hitting dirt. Riders took off helmets. That was what made it real. Hard faces, tired faces, young faces, White hair, tattoos, old road scars, eyes red from miles in wind, and maybe more than wind. Some of them had known the men Martha saved. Some had only heard the story. Some had ridden all night because somebody somewhere said an old woman on a burned ridge had opened her door when death was faster than rescue. The first man to step forward was enormous, broad as a gate, beard braided with silver rings. He removed his gloves carefully like he was entering a church and stopped a few feet from Martha. "We came for Martha Bell." The chapter president nodded toward her. "You found her." The big man looked at Martha, and whatever speech he might have prepared collapsed into something simpler. "You saved our brothers." Another rider stepped forward, carrying a crate of bottled water. Another had medical supplies. Another came with lumber straps over one shoulder. Behind them, flatbeds rolled in, loaded with fencing tools, generators, feed sacks, tarps, water tanks, propane canisters, chainsaws, and boxes marked with handwritten labels. One bike trailer carried nothing but coolers. Another was stacked with hay bales. A pickup behind the second line had windows painted with one message in white soap marker: "For Martha." Martha looked from the supplies to the men, to the valley still filling with motorcycles. "This is too much." The big rider shook his head. "No, ma'am. Too much is what you did with one house. Buried water and no guarantee that anybody would remember." Behind him, a younger biker with fresh road dust on his face swallowed hard before speaking. "My cousin was in the bunker. Deke. If not for you, he'd be dead before morning." A second voice rose from farther back. "Rico, too." Then another. "Leon." Then another. "Nolan." Names spread through the yard like embers in reverse. Not burning, but restoring shape. Men calling out the brothers who had come back alive. Men identifying the debt. Men making it public so no one could shrink it later. Martha held herself still through all of it, but her throat moved once when she swallowed. One older rider near the front took off his glasses, wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, and said, "My old man used to tell stories about a trucker on Balar Gap who pulled patched riders out of an iced river. Said his wife was cut from the same steel." The chapter president looked at Martha then because he knew that name mattered. The old rider went on. "When word came through with yours attached to it, nobody had to ask twice." That hit her harder than the noise had. For a moment she looked down. Not in shame, not in weakness, but like she was measuring the years between one act of loyalty and another, and finding they had not disappeared after all. Then the valley answered again. More engines, still more riders. Thousands now without question. The county officials who had come to discuss acquisition that morning were nowhere near the yard anymore. They stood far below near their white trucks, looking up at the road they had assumed belonged to paper and procedure, now swallowed whole by something older than permits and louder than bureaucracy. The chapter president stepped closer to Martha. "This part you should hear from them." "Not me." So he moved aside. The big silver-bearded rider drew himself up, looked over the wreck of the house, the burned yard, the windmill, the bunker, the woman standing in the middle of all of it, and spoke loud enough for the men behind him to hear. "We're not here for a visit." Martha raised her eyes. He gestured toward the endless line of bikes, trucks, trailers, and men. "We're here because nobody who saves 57 of ours gets left alone to stand in the ashes." The yard went completely still. Then Martha looked out over the sea of motorcycles. The stacked supplies, the men taking off helmets in silence, the rows still arriving through smoke from both directions, and asked the only question big enough for what was happening. "What are all of you doing on my land?" The silver-bearded rider did not answer her alone. He took one step back, and the men behind him answered with motion. Not chaos, not theater. Work. Trailers were unlatched. Ramps came down. Chains rattled. Pickup beds opened. Lumber was unloaded in neat stacks. Fencing rolls hit the dirt. Water tanks were moved by 4 men at a time. Coolers, medical crates, tarps, generators, feed sacks, fuel cans, tool chest, portable pumps, blankets, cots, plywood sheets, bags of concrete mix, chainsaws, spare hoses, nails, gloves, boots, animal feed, propane heaters, first aid kits, Everything started coming onto Martha Bell's burned property with the discipline of men who had not ridden all this way to make a scene. They had come to build one. The big silver-bearded rider finally answered, "We're rebuilding it." Martha looked from the stacks of supplies to the men already moving toward the broken porch, the burned fence line, the split barn wall, the windmill base, and the bunker path. All of it. A rider with a scarred face and a prosthetic left hand gave a rough grin. "Ma'am, there's too many of us for half a job." That was the moment the ridge changed, not emotionally, physically. Within minutes, the ruined property stopped looking like a place waiting to be condemned and started looking like a site under organized recovery. One crew stripped the last dangerous remnants of the porch corner and shored up the roof line with fresh bracing. Another crew set posts along the collapsed fence run. Another cleared blackened debris from the yard and sorted it into piles. Salvage, scrap, burn, structural remains. Two riders with medical backgrounds set up a treatment station under a tarp by the bunker and started rechecking burned smoke exposure and broken ribs. Somebody brought in folding tables. Somebody else laid out maps. Another group rolled a fresh water tank into place and connected a temporary line. The chapter president watched it all with his arms folded, hips still stiff, the edge of exhaustion still in his face. Martha stood beside him. "This isn't normal." "No," he said, "this is personal." She watched a line of riders lifting new porch beams into place while another dozen cleared the trench route she had used through the fire. "Do they all know why they're here?" The chapter president looked out over the sea of bikes covering the valley and shoulder roads below. "They know enough. An old woman on a mountain saved 57. Then county men came with papers before the ashes cooled. That version spread fast." Martha gave a low, humorless sound. "County men always did have poor timing." "Not poor," he said. "Confident." That word landed heavier. By noon, the whole place was humming. The Hells Angels who had survived the ridge were no longer victims waiting to be processed or wounded men lying still in a bunker. Those who could stand were helping. Rico carried lumber. Nolan worked a post-hole bar into the dirt with a shoulder brace someone had rigged from canvas and tape. Deke One Arm, still bad, became the unofficial keeper of the tool layout, barking at younger riders not to bury the hammers under the nail crates. Wade ran water and checked on the firefighters. Rafe, leg wrapped and limping ugly, still refused to sit down unless somebody physically forced him. Leon, burned and pale, was ordered to stay on a cot under the tarp. He kept trying to get up anyway. "You'll rip half your skin open," Graybeard told him. Leon looked over at the crews rebuilding Martha's porch. "Then point me at something small." Graybeard shoved a coffee thermos into his good hand. "Hold that. Be useful. Quiet." Even Tommy, ribs bound and voice still raw, managed to sit up enough to watch. The first firefighter, the one who recognized Martha, spoke to anyone who would listen. Not loudly, just steadily. He told the rescue crews what had happened in the ravine, told them what she had done, told them she had not just sheltered bikers. She had gone back into the burn zone for county men after the radio world had already written the ridge off. That part spread fast too. So fast that by early afternoon, journalists started coming back. At first, one local camera team, then a regional van, then a reporter from farther out who had heard thousands of bikers and come expecting spectacle, only to arrive at a scorched ridge where hundreds of patched riders were rebuilding a widow's home in near total discipline, while the surviving firefighters called her the reason they were alive. The camera crews kept trying to put microphones in Martha's face. She kept stepping around them with a hammer, a coil of wire, or a bucket in her hands. A young reporter with perfect hair and ash on her shoes asked, "Mrs. Bell, how does it feel to have become the center of this extraordinary show of support?" Martha set a box of nails on the porch rail and looked at her once. "It feels like work still needs doing." Then she walked away. That line made the evening broadcast. The county came back before sunset. This time they brought more than clipboards. Deputies, 2 county attorneys, Deputy Assessor Keene again looking less comfortable than before, the planner from earlier, a woman from code enforcement, and 3 SUVs that stopped well below the property because no one felt like driving farther into a valley packed with motorcycles whose owners were all looking uphill at the same time. The first row of riders did not move toward them. They simply stood where they were. That was worse. A living wall of patched leather. Road faces, crossed arms, and total stillness lined the lower edge of the ridge, while more men kept working above them as if county vehicles were just another piece of weather not worth stopping for. Keene got out anyway. He tried to carry himself with official calm, but the mountain no longer belonged to paper. Everyone could see that. He climbed only halfway before the silver-bearded rider stepped down to meet him. "State your business." Keene cleared his throat. "We're here on county authority regarding hazard mitigation review and pending access restrictions." The silver-bearded rider glanced back at the property where men were repairing fencing and reinforcing Martha's porch under camera lenses and firefighter witness. "Looks like access is fine." Keene's jaw tightened. "We need to speak with Mrs. Bell." From higher up the yard, Martha's voice carried down before anybody had to go fetch her. "You're speaking loud enough." Heads turned. She came down from the porch slowly, one hand dusty from work, the other holding the unopened county packet from that morning. Behind her walked the chapter president, graybeard, Tommy in a brace, and the first firefighter with his arm immobilized. Not bodyguards. Witnesses. Keene tried again. "Mrs. Bell, this property remains under review. Any structural activity here may interfere with official assessment and future county action." Martha held up the packet. "This one," Keene didn't answer. She opened it in front of him for the first time, leafed once through the typed pages, then tapped a paragraph with one blunt finger. "Hazard Mitigation Acquisition Authority, Emergency Condemnation Pathway, Redevelopment Suitability Review." Her eyes lifted. "You boys wrote all that fast." One of the county attorneys stepped in. "Those are standard post-disaster procedural options." Tommy gave a painful laugh from behind Martha. "Funny how rescue took longer than paperwork." Several riders smiled without warmth. The attorney stiffened. "Sir, this is not the time." The first firefighter cut him off. "No, now is exactly the time." He stepped forward with his arm in a sling and ash still in the seams of his boots. "I was on that ridge. So was Tommy. We were pinned out past the ravine after County Command lost contact and presumed everybody dead. Martha Bell came back out for us after she'd already gotten 57 civilians through a burnover alive. That's the record you should be making." Cameras pivoted fast. Keene's face changed, not guilt, calculation failing in public. The planner tried to recover the ground. "Regardless of the rescue circumstances, this location has long presented infrastructural and safety concerns. The county has repeatedly proposed improvement options." Martha nodded once. "Road widening, utility cut, scenic access, easement pressure. Offers to buy low and call it planning." The reporter with ash on her shoes looked up sharply. "You've been asked to sell before 3 times formal," Martha said. "More if you count polite threats." That landed. The attorney started speaking at once, trying to shrink the moment into process. But too many people were now listening. Too many cameras. Too many riders. Too many men alive who should have been dead. Martha Bell had behaved the way official systems expected lonely old women to behave. The chapter president finally stepped forward. He did not shout. That made it worse for the county. "We buried brothers. We know the difference between bad luck and a setup waiting for weakness. These papers showed up before this woman's porch cooled. That tells us plenty," the silver-bearded rider added. "And now it tells the cameras." For the first time, Keene looked openly rattled. His eyes moved from the firefighters to the reporters to the rows and rows of motorcycles below, then back to Martha. "You're making this adversarial." Martha folded the county packet once, neatly. "Son, you brought acquisition papers to a burned house before you brought respect. You made it adversarial." Silence followed. Not empty silence, public silence. The kind that says something has shifted and everyone present can feel the new balance settling in real time. Then one of the county attorneys, perhaps realizing the ground was gone, said the worst possible thing. "We can resolve this more quietly if necessary." A dozen cameras caught it. So did every rider on the ridge. Graybeard laughed once, a hard broken sound. "Quietly, that one ought to go on a plaque." Martha stepped closer to Keene, not threatening, not dramatic, just old and upright and impossible to move. "You don't get quiet anymore." By then the journalists were firing questions in every direction. about previous offers, about fire risk warnings, about whether the county had failed to maintain access routes, about why a known vulnerable ridge had faster paperwork than rescue, about the history of the Bell property, about the emergency classification, about the letters, the witnesses, the timeline, the firefighters, the presumed dead radio call. The county stopped answering in full sentences. That told its own story. As evening fell, work on the property never stopped. Lights were brought in, generators hummed. More fencing went up. The porch stood level again. Temporary roof braces were secured. Feed was stacked in a rebuilt corner of the barn. Someone even repaired one of the old rocking chairs and set it on the rebuilt section of porch like they were restoring a throne. Martha stood in the yard watching all of it. The chapter president came beside her. They're not going to bury this now. No, he looked at the county vehicles far below. Still there, still boxed out by witnesses' cameras and more loyalty than any office knew what to do with. And tomorrow gets louder. Martha looked toward the rebuilt porch, the men working under flood lamps, the firefighters talking to reporters, the road still lined with bikes all the way down the valley. Yes, tomorrow they answer in daylight. By morning, the ridge no longer looked like a place the county could quietly swallow. It looked like evidence. Cameras were already set up before the sun cleared the smoke. Reporters stood in jackets that still smelled faintly of ash. The county vehicles came back in a line, slower this time, with less certainty in the tires. Keene returned. So did the attorneys, so did the planner, but now they were walking into daylight. Witnesses, and a road still filled with motorcycles for as far as the valley could hold them. The rebuilt section of Martha's porch had become the center of it all. Not a stage, a fact. The old rocking chair sat there again, upright on fresh boards. The windmill behind the house was still black and twisted. The barn still wore its damage openly. The mountain all around them was burned to the bone. Nothing had been polished into a lie. That was the problem for the county. The truth was standing in plain view. Keene tried first. He unfolded papers, cleared his throat, began speaking in the careful bureaucratic voice men use when they hope language can smother reality. Given the circumstances, the county is prepared to continue formal review of the Bell property and determine the appropriate mitigation pathway. No, Martha said. She did not raise her voice. That made every microphone catch it clean. Keene stopped. Mrs. Bell, if you'll let me finish. You finished when you brought acquisition papers before condolences. A murmur moved through the crowd. The attorney stepped in fast, trying to regain shape. This is a complex process. No one is disputing that lives were saved here. But property, safety, public access, and future fire risk. Tommy, ribs bound and face still marked by heat, cut across them from where he stood near the porch rail. Future fire risk. Every camera turned. He pointed toward the county officials with one trembling but steady hand. We filed warnings on West Ridge fuel load 2 seasons in a row, asked for brush mitigation support, road clearance, backup access review. Nothing moved. The first firefighter stepped up beside him, sling visible, voice stronger than the day before. We were sent into a vulnerable corridor with known hazards and delayed support. Then command lost contact and wrote the ridge off. Martha Bell did not. That landed hard. The reporters started firing questions before the attorneys could contain them. Did the county receive those warnings? Why were access routes still poor? Why was hazard acquisition language drafted so quickly? Had the Bell property been targeted before the fire? Had redevelopment plans already included that ridge? The planner made the mistake of answering. Regional access improvements had been under consideration for years. How many years? One reporter asked. He hesitated. Martha finished for him. Long enough to ask me to sell 3 times. A second reporter turned sharply. 3 times. Yes. For below value, Martha looked at Keene. Why don't you tell them what lonely widows are worth on paper after a disaster? He didn't answer. That silence did more damage than anything else. Then the silver-bearded rider stepped forward. Not threatening, not loud. Just impossible to ignore. We're not here to fight your deputies. We're here so no one lies about what happened on this ridge. The chapter president joined him. 57 of ours came up this mountain. 57 walked back down because she opened her door, split her shelter system, rationed water, moved the injured, and went back into a burn zone for 2 county firefighters after your own radio had us marked dead. He pointed once toward the bunker, once toward the trench, once toward the Black Ravine side. You can stand here and call that unauthorized sheltering if you want, but every man breathing on this ridge calls it rescue. That was the end of the county's balance. The attorneys stopped speaking in paragraphs. Keene stopped meeting cameras. The planner kept trying to fold everything back into process. But process sounds thin when living witnesses keep answering it with names, injuries, and timelines. Rico spoke. Then Deke. Then Nolan. Then Wade, whose hands still shook a little when he talked, but whose voice did not. Leon, pale and hurting, insisted on being helped to his feet just long enough to say, "She told me nobody gets left on her property." And nobody did. The statement hit the crowd so cleanly, even the reporters stopped moving for a beat. Martha stood through all of it without trying to make herself larger than she was. An old woman in work boots, smoke in the lines of her face, hands marked by nails, dirt, and burns. No speech prepared. No hunger for attention. Just a woman who had done what needed doing and had no intention of surrendering the land where she had done it. By noon, the county reversed itself. Not gracefully, not honestly enough to satisfy anyone, but publicly. Keene announced that condemnation review was suspended pending independent assessment. Hazard acquisition language was withdrawn. Prior property actions would be re-examined. The ridge would remain under Martha Bell's ownership while outside review went forward. It was not justice in full, but it was retreat. And everyone knew why. Not because the county had found its conscience overnight, because too many people were watching now, because the firefighters had spoken, because the story had escaped the valley, because thousands of motorcycles lined the road like a living memory of debt being returned with interest. By late afternoon, the cameras were still there, but the sharpest part was over. The riders went back to work. Some finished the porch railing, some reinforced the barn, some cleared the last black debris from around the house, others stacked lumber, repaired the fence, checked the bunker door, set fresh water in line. The property no longer looked like a ruin waiting for judgment. It looked like a place claimed by the living. When evening came, engines finally began starting again. Not all at once. 1 here, 3 there. Then a rolling sequence down the valley as groups prepared to leave. Helmets went on, hands were shaken. Supplies were left behind in ordered rows. Men who looked like they belonged to motion stood still long enough to say goodbye properly. Some saluted her, some hugged her once, awkward and hard. Some only nodded because words would have cheapened it. The silver-bearded rider was one of the last to leave. He took Martha's hand in both of his. "You've got roads in every direction now." Martha answered, "Good, I may need parts." He laughed, and this time so did she. At dusk, the valley began to empty. The thunder of thousands softened into hundreds, then dozens, then the occasional fading line of chrome and sound disappearing down the black road. Smoke hung blue over the burn ridge. The repaired porch creaked gently under new boards. The rocking chair waited in its place. Martha sat in it at last. For the first time in days, nobody was asking her for a count, a decision, a bandage, or a statement. The mountain was quiet enough to hear the last engines idling far below as they rolled away in long, patient waves. The chapter president stood at the foot of the steps, helmet in one hand. "You all right here?" Martha looked out over her land, scarred but still hers, then toward the road where the last of the bikes were heading off into the evening. "No," he frowned slightly. Then she looked up at him, and there was something new in her face. Not softness exactly, something rarer. "I'm not alone here." He nodded once, like that was the only ending the story had ever earned, then turned and walked toward his bike. Martha leaned back in the rocking chair and watched the road a while longer, not waiting for the world to remember her.